Are you searching for the best in online black radio? Then go to blacktalkradionetwork.com, helping you filter through the noise. Real talk, black talk.
The internet is full of half-truths and all-out lies. We've all seen them, and many people on social media complaining about it. Here's your chance to show and prove. WorldAfropedia.com is a black-owned and operated encyclopedia. There are several thousand articles, but we need help. We can't uncover all the truth ourselves. So please, join us and become a writer, editor, or blogger for WorldAfropedia.com today. Every little bit counts. We owe it to the future generations to put the truth out there. Visit WorldAfropedia.com, the African-centered encyclopedia, a global database of African knowledge for the purpose of bringing about global African wisdom and understanding. WorldAfropedia.com.
I'm Dr. Gregory McGriff, and my 6 words are 55 miles per hour means you, black man.
55 mph means you, black man. Those are the 6 words he sent to NPR's Michelle Norris, who's with us once again. Hi, Michelle.
Hey, Steve.
Provocative statement there.
And there's a lot in that story. He's calling up an image that we're all familiar with. We've all seen that 55 mph sign on the side of the road. When Dr. McGriff sent in his 6 words, he actually was listening to a member station in North Carolina, WFAE. He went to the website, knew immediately what his 6 words would involve, 55 mph. And to help us understand what he meant by those 6 words, he sent in a little additional commentary. Let's listen to that quickly.
I am an Ivy League graduate and a board-certified medical doctor. The subject of race comes up all the time, but the conversation that should follow is usually very short. When I see the speed sign on the road announcing 55 miles per hour, I know that posting is meant for me. My white counterparts proceed a bit faster.
Wow, that is a powerful statement. Why does he think 55 miles per hour is directed at him as an African American?
It's a metaphor for a lot of things in his life. And to sort of understand who he is, let's just talk a little bit about him. He now lives in Rutherfordton, North Carolina, but he's a native of Hartford, Connecticut. He studied economics and pre-med at the University of Pennsylvania. He went to medical school at Wake Forest, did his internship at Yale's residency at UConn, University of Connecticut.
Impressively qualified guy.
Very qualified. And based on that resume, you would think he would be a real high flyer. And yet, he says that he has to move through life with great caution. He moves through life slowly, whether he's on the road or whether he's practicing medicine, because he says that any kind of display of professional confidence or sort of an overt display of success makes his colleagues or even his patients uncomfortable.
55 is slow. If you have to do 55 miles per hour all the time, you're not going to get very far. And if you look around, everybody else is going a little bit faster.
And you actually hear him moving slowly in this conversation, picking his words carefully.
Yes.
But let me ask Michelle Norris, is he being held back by other people, slowed down by other people, or is he slowing himself down?
Well, to hear Dr. McGriff tell his own story, it sounds like it's a little bit of both. He moves with great caution, but he says he has great reason. And he shared a specific story that he says helps illustrate this. When we contacted him, he had just had an experience. He was called into the office of a hospital administrator at the hospital where he works in North Carolina because someone had issued a complaint. A patient had issued a complaint. The patient had said that the doctor had used language that was foreign to them.
A family was upset with me because I was uppity. He said words that we didn't understand. And this is something that I'm sure none of my partners, because I asked them, they've never gotten that particular complaint. And so it's never my desire to be uppity. It's my hope, rather than be condescending and speak down to anyone, is that to just speak in natural language. And if there's a word or two that's a little bit above your vocabulary, it is not because I'm better than you. it is not because I have more education, and I'm certainly not trying to lord my intellect over you. I'm simply trying to communicate.
Context of White Supremacy, Gus T Renegade in for another broadcast, hopefully to share constructive information on the system of white supremacy. Today's date, Friday, May 6th, 2016, so I have been told. That audio segment, we heard NPR's Race Card Project. That was Dr. Gregory McGriff. I laugh. That's from 2013. I laugh every time I hear it, even though it's not really funny, because folks who were listening to the Cows back then, I contacted Dr. McGriff down in North Carolina to see if we could have him as a guest on the program to talk more about, what he shared in the clip and how he experiences racism as a medical doctor. Lo and behold, that clip aired in May 2013. Within a matter of weeks, Dr. McGriff received notice from the hospital where he's employed that he was going to be fired as a result of doing this interview on NPR. They heard it and were just disgusted and couldn't believe that he went on and said all of this. And so he was, preparing to get a new job and all this other stuff. Anyway, we stayed in contact for weeks and months, really. And then eventually they decided that they were not going to terminate him, that he would be able to remain employed there. But obviously it was such a traumatic experience for him. He said he did not want to do any more public radio interviews, certainly talking about how he experiences racism as a medical doctor. So I definitely wanted to make sure I included that at some point while we proceed through Harriet Washington's Medical Apartheid. This is our third book study session. Phenomenal book, extremely important information, and just what you heard with Dr. McGriff. Racism comes all the way through, whether you're being tortured, experimented on, even if you should happen to be the healthcare practitioner, racism will still be visited upon you. With that, we will get started. We're picking up in Chapter 2, Medical Apartheid, Harriet Washington. Context of White Supremacy, audio segment number 1.
When a smallpox epidemic revisited Boston in the summer of 1721, Cotton Mather and his clerical brethren called for a mass inoculation of the people of Boston. However, the city's physicians, led by William Douglas, resented being told by a gaggle of ministers that Africans had devised the panacea they had long sought. Zabdiel Boylston was the only physician to embrace inoculation, but not before testing it on 2 black slaves, then 248 more, as well as his own 6-year-old son. Boylston then proved that he had achieved immunity by exposing them to cases of smallpox. The physicians' resistance turned uglier and violent. The popular press played no small role, serving as the battleground while doctors condemned variolation because it was the laughable, unchristian product of occult African practices. The fact that inoculation worked seemed not to play into physicians' assessments, and their bitter attacks were not confined to the intellectual sphere. A lighted grenade was thrown into Mather's house, along with a note declaring, "Cotton Mather, you dog, damn you! I'll inoculate you with this, with a pox to you." This prompted him to complain, "I do not know why it is more unlawful to learn of Africans, how to help against the poison of the smallpox, than it is to learn of our Indians, how to help against the poison of a rattlesnake." In the end, the obvious reduction of death rates from 14% to less than 2% convinced doctors that inoculation was the city's savior. Approximately 8,000 Bostonians became ill, and 844 died. But while 1 in every 9 untreated patients succumbed, only 1 in every 48 inoculated people was stricken. Mather made a scientific report to the Royal Society in 1722. By 1750, inoculation was standard in America and Europe, as it long had been in Africa. Historians hailed it as the earliest important experiment in America in preventative medicine. But Onesimus came to share the fate of nearly every slave who contributed to medical research: facelessness. Can we judge 18th century doctors for experimenting on blacks? A common apology for experimental abuse insists that we should not apply present-day medical ethics to the medical behaviors of yesterday, which were governed by less enlightened medical standards for everyone, not just African Americans. However, ethical strictures did govern the behavior of 19th century physicians. Before the mid-20th century, these binding ethical standards were not enforced by federal laws, but consisted of medical oaths, professional codes, and rules governing clinical conduct within medical schools, hospitals, and other institutions. These rules were carefully adhered to in cases of white patients, but were routinely broken for African Americans. The harm done to African Americans in such scenarios goes far beyond the injuries to the subjects themselves. As African Americans came to learn of the experiments that Sims and his contemporaries conducted, these experiments fed an aversion to the health system. They also harmed the community of African Americans by strengthening a perception of them as appropriate human fodder for research. Another recurrent ethical issue was raised by researchers' contention that blacks were responsible for their own illnesses. Experimental remedies sought to correct disease caused by blacks' inherent physical flaws. So if an experimental procedure was painful or dangerous, the logic went, blacks had only themselves to blame, not the surgeon. Some, such as Dr. Medower of Virginia, claimed that if blacks had cooperated more fully, the procedures could have been perfected. Researchers who exploited enslaved blacks were guilty of more than ethical blindness. These early medical investigators also practiced bad science on a very basic level. They were simply illogical. For example, many researchers argued that blacks were so different from whites, less intelligent, much less sensitive to pain, possessing numerous physical anomalies as well as markedly different patterns of disease immunity, as to constitute a separate species. Given this supposedly vast biological chasm between blacks and whites, how could scientists logically infer results of medical experiments from blacks to whites? This particular logical flaw recurred regularly in early research with African Americans. But, logical or not, scientists' fascination with the black body as a medical entity was about to enter new arenas, from the clinic to the circus. Chapter 3. Circus Africanus. The popular display of black bodies. The Negro with us is not an actual physical being of flesh and bones and blood, but a hideous monster of the mind, ugly beyond all physical portraying, so utterly and ineffably monstrous as to frighten reason from its throne, and justice from its balance, and mercy from its hallowed temple, and to blot out shame and probity, and the eternal sympathies of nature, so far as these things have presence in the breasts or being of American Republicans. No, sir. It is a constructive Negro, a John Roe and Richard Doe Negro, that haunts with grim presence the precincts of this republic, shaking his gory locks over legislative halls and family prayers. James McCune Smith, M.D. By 1904, a swashbuckling missionary explorer, Samuel Phillips Verner, had acquired a veritable Noah's Ark of exotic fauna during 3 trips to the interior of the Dark Continent. The last expedition was commissioned in 1903 by the St. Louis Exposition Company, which paid the South Carolina-born Verner to hunt men instead of monkeys. He was to bring African pygmies to America for display at the St. Louis World's Fair. Upon his return to America, Verner found himself romanticized as a reincarnation of Dr. David Livingstone, whom he claimed as his posthumous mentor. As an ordained minister in the Presbyterian Church, Verner was also lionized in church circles as an imparter of morality to the Congo natives he doggedly hectored at the Southern Presbyterian Missionary House in Lubo, chiding them for their immodest dress and sexual behavior. His American admirers did not know that between 1895 and 1899, Werner had fathered a daughter and son on an African orphan girl there. By 1906, the World's Fair was over, and the cash-strapped Werner was selling off his animals, artifacts, and more. Upon the receipt of a financial gift, he bestowed a prized equatorial specimen upon William T. Hornaday, director of the Bronx Zoological Gardens. Werner's present was 23-year-old Ota Benga, an Mbuti widower from southern Africa, in what is now the Democratic Republic of Congo. Around 1903, Benga had returned from a hunting trip, only to find his village in smoking ruins and his wife, children, and entire tribe slaughtered by force publique thugs supported by the Belgian government. Benga himself was seized and sold into Werner's hands. Hornaday's views about the natives of sub-Saharan Africa mirrored Werner's own, conscripting Darwin in the service of racism. He told the New York Times that there exists a close analogy of the African savage to the apes. Scientific American agreed. The Congo pygmies are small, ape-like, elfish creatures, furtive and mischievous. They closely parallel the brownies and goblins of our fairy tales. They live in the dense tangled forests in absolute savagery, while they exhibit many ape-like features in their bodies. But Hornaday espoused a more progressive vision as a scientific artist, and we have him to thank for the modern American zoo. As chief taxidermist of the National Museum, the Smithsonian, a position he held until 1890, he had inherited a static mausoleum of tatty taxidermy enshrined on plaster pedestals with only laconic placards to suggest what the animal had been like in life. In 1888, Hornaday persuaded the museum to add a wing of living animals in lifelike settings, which proved so popular a revolution that it became the National Zoological Gardens. He resigned over differences of vision, but in 1896 he reemerged as the first director of the New York Zoological Gardens, known as the Bronx Zoo, the world's largest, lushest, and most varied zoo. Hornaday's passion was for colorful verisimilitude in the recreation of his animals' natural habitats. With a verdant Bronx park as his canvas, Hornaday installed colorful, exotic animals of every genus grouped with their natural companions amid native vegetation. So when Benga was locked in the monkey house, before the staring crowd and with keepers always nearby, he was given a bow and arrow to brandish. His cage was littered with bones, and his two cage mates were Dinah, a gorilla, and an orangutan called Dohung. The placard on Benga's enclosure read, "The African Pygmy, Ota Benga, height 4 feet 11 inches, weight 103 pounds, brought from the Kasai River, Congo Free State, South Central Africa, by Dr. Samuel P. Werner, exhibited each afternoon during September." A September 10 New York Times headline trumpeted, "Bushman shares a cage with the Bronx Park apes." Black New Yorkers were incensed, and representatives of the clergy, led by the Reverend Dr. MacArthur, pressed Mayor George B. McClellan to withdraw the city's support from the exhibit. As another minister, a Reverend Gordon, told the New York Times, "Our race is depressed enough without exhibiting one of us with the apes. We think we are worthy of being considered human beings, with souls." The Times turned an unsympathetic ear to African American objections. One Reverend colored brother objects to the curious exhibition on the grounds that it is an impious effort to lend credibility to Darwin's dreadful theories. The Reverend colored brother should be told that evolution is now taught in the textbooks of all the schools, and that it is no more debatable than the multiplication table. The swipe at creationism did not address Gordon's immediate concerns, but did hit a nerve among many whites who shared Gordon's outrage. Some were angered by this inhumane insult to blacks, and others, who opposed the teaching of Darwin's theory of evolution, were afraid that Benga's dramatic presence would offer a powerful plebeian argument for the theory of evolution. The entertainment of a monkey man might persuade people who were untouched by the theory's scientific merits. Mayor McClellan snubbed the black delegation, referring them to the Parks Department, and another Times account hinted that Benga differed little from the zoo's animals. Ota Benga is a normal specimen of his race or tribe, with a brain as much developed as are those of its other members, and can be studied with profit. The pygmies are an efficient people in their native forests, but they are very low in the human scale, and the suggestion that Benga should be in a school instead of a cage ignores the high probability that school would be a place of torture to him, and one from which he could draw no advantage whatever. A lively epistolatory debate ensued in the pages of the Times, heavily weighted in favor of retaining Benga, and many of the letters were signed by respondents with MD and PhD degrees. One doctor suggested, "It is a pity that Dr. Hornaday does not introduce the system of short lectures or talks in connection with such exhibitions, to help our clergymen to familiarize themselves with the scientific point of view so foreign to many of them." Times journalists agreed that Benga provided a valuable tool for illustrating basic evolutionary precepts. To oppose his internment was to oppose science. These precepts included physical similarities to the lower primates that scientific racism was beginning to popularize widely. Anthropometric portraits of blacks and apes demonstrated how blacks' facial angles, stature, stance, and gait resembled those of monkeys, chimpanzees, and orangutans. Blacks' hair, or wool, was compared to animal pelts. Such uncomplimentary images were published in scientific journals and would soon adorn children's textbooks. Scientists alleged that apes preferred to mate with black women, just as black men lusted after white women, their own evolutionary betters. At the zoo, the Times revealed that Benga's situation was escalating. There were 40,000 visitors to the park on Sunday. Nearly every man, woman, and child of this crowd made for the monkey house to see the star attraction in the park, the wild man from Africa. They chased him about the grounds all day, howling, jeering, and yelling. Some of them poked him in the ribs, others tripped him up. All laughed at him. Finally, Benga retaliated by attacking visitors with a knife and a bow and arrows, and the zoo ejected him. Black New Yorkers organized a collection, which was insufficient to return him home as he wished, but provided enough to cap his file teeth and send him to the Virginia Theological Seminary and College, where he proved himself an able student. Benga then found work in a Lynchburg, Virginia tobacco factory, where he fit in well as an efficient worker and a beloved Pied Piper who taught local children to fish and hunt. But he spoke often and tearfully of wishing to return home to the Congo. And when he realized he could never save enough for passage, his depression became profound. In 1916, Benga committed suicide with that ubiquitous icon of Western technological achievement, a handgun. Hornaday had the last word in his obituary of Benga, which appeared in the Zoological Bulletin, took a semi-comic tone, and was filled with uncomplimentary untruths that fit his racist agenda. Benga's tragedy illustrates how American scientists found black bodies useful even when they were not trying new medications or surgeries. This chapter focuses upon the popular public display and imaging of black bodies. But the boundary separating popular display from medical display was a porous one, a permeable membrane with copious migration in both directions. Some medicalized freak body types were exclusive to blacks, who had a patent on white Negroes and, in the United States, a near monopoly on primitive peoples. Even the black idiot savant, a perennial attraction, was considered more freakish than the white variety because his intellectual gifts offered a greater contrast to blacks' ostensibly low intelligence. In the late 18th century, long before the 1859 publication of The Origin of Species. Medical researchers had addressed scientific questions regarding human hierarchies by displaying black bodies in contexts that emphasized supposed parallels to animals and children, even as black scientists and abolitionists used the same bodies to illustrate the intimate kinship between whites and blacks. Unusual or exotic black bodies also provided wildly popular entertainment with a medical flavor. Alert entrepreneurs, from P.T. Barnum to Harvard's Louis Agassiz, exploited them for profit and fame. Whether one was gawking at a white Negro, a 161-year-old black wet nurse, an African giantess, or a Hottentot missing link in a cage, the subject was usually forced to display his body. He may have been a slave, a freak with an anomalous body, or a kidnapped freedman. However, a few enterprising souls offered themselves up for pay, especially in the early days of quasi-scientific displays. Advertisements for Myself, Henry Moss. Around 1790, when Henry Moss realized that his body had embarked upon a mystifying transformation into whiteness, he cut out the middleman to exhibit himself. Unlike later sideshow freaks who had to remain mute while barkers trumpeted the manufactured exotica that passed for their life stories, Moss was his own barker. Proudly straddling a museum chair or slowly strolling the stage of a saloon, Moss peeled the linen from his variegated body in a tantalizing medical striptease while he unreeled his own story. From his humble but free 1754 birth in Goochland County, Virginia, to his Revolutionary War exploits as a soldier in South Carolina and Virginia, to the mysterious gradual lightening that was spreading his fame, Moss spoke for himself before enraptured crowds in Philadelphia taverns and museums, charging 25 cents per person, heady fees for 1796, the year he addressed the American Philosophical Society. Moss became a familiar figure even in Europe, where his piebald visage graced chocolates and German almanacs. President George Washington was a face in the throng when Moss appeared at Mr. Leach's Tavern, the Sign of the Black Horse, in Philadelphia in 1796. So were prominent racial theorists of the day, including the Reverend Samuel Stanhope Smith and an entranced Benjamin Rush, M.D., who is now remembered as the father of American psychiatry and who then believed that black skin was the manifestation of a type of leprosy that he called negritude. Calling blacks lepers certainly sounds like the pronouncement of an inveterate racist, and this is how Rush is sometimes regarded. However, Rush was not a racist, but a passionate abolitionist, and his views of black physiology were nuanced. Rush believed that blacks were diseased, but that they could be cured. He welcomed the various albinos, leucoethiops, and vitiligo-stricken white Negroes as hopeful monsters, living proof that blacks could become healthily white. Cure was desirable, averred Rush, because eliminating black skin would eliminate the chief social and religious argument for enslavement, and because he believed blacks themselves preferred white skin. Rush hungered to understand and hoped to duplicate the process by which Negro skin lost its color, and he theorized that pressure and friction, violent rubbing, could banish color from the rete mucosum, the fictional skin layer. Rush never took up the scalpel against Moss to test this theory, but he cataloged the methods that other physicians had used to whiten black skin and hair, including hydrochloric acid, bleeding, purging, the juice of unripe peaches, muriatic acid, and even pronounced fear. Rush did experiment with sulfuric acid on black skins, probably those of cadavers. In late 1796, Rush's protege, Dr. Charles Caldwell, acquired Henry Moss in a manner that can be read as a disquieting infringement upon Moss's freedom. I took him in some measure under my care, procured for him suitable lodgings and accommodation, induced many persons to visit him, and kept him under my strict and constant observation, and by his permission, and for a slight reward, emphasis added, made on him such experiments as suited my purpose. Although Caldwell was careful to note that he obtained Moss's permission, one has only Caldwell's word that Moss willingly accepted the loss of autonomy, social status, and income in exchange for suitable but heavily monitored lodgings. I am not convinced, in part because this scenario evokes an eerie parallel to one of the most infamous exploitative experimental relationships in history, that between Alexis St. Martin, a poor, illiterate French-Canadian backwoods trapper, and Dr. William Beaumont, who used him as an experimental subject for 11 years, beginning in 1822. St. Martin was a consistently reluctant subject, but Beaumont portrayed him as a willing one. Also, Caldwell's veracity is suspect. In his 1855 memoirs, for example, he falsely claimed that Moss's skin had regained its color. Caldwell forced Moss to exercise vigorously in order to produce perspiration, which he examined closely for exuded color. Caldwell also minutely recorded the expanding area of Moss's white skin. Admitting that he could not find Moss's rete mucosum, Caldwell concluded that it must have retreated deeper into the body, away from the gaze of scientists. Only anatomical dissection can find it. Henry Moss was lost to history after he left Caldwell in 1796. His appetite for self-exhibition apparently sated, and within a decade, his brand of self-promotion became unthinkable. The display of black bodies was conducted in a more repressive atmosphere as black-white relations grew ever more acerbic, fed by abolitionist fervor, large-scale slave revolts, and legal challenges to slavery. In 1806, for example, a very dark-skinned male slave owned by Major Banks of Williamsburg, Virginia, began to turn white. Dr. Alexander D. Galt urged that he be displayed as a spectacle that would excite the curiosity and wonder of everyone, but the slave remained voiceless and unnamed. Moreover, physicians and owners controlled and transformed the nature of the bodies they displayed by enhancing the distinctiveness of their appearance and by showcasing them in a propagandistic environment that emphasized freakishness, evolutionary inferiority, and bestiality. Barkers invented fictitious histories that emphasized the displayed specimen's alien nature. The features of displayed blacks were used to locate blacks' low status on a supposed evolutionary continuum between monkeys and whites. The paying hordes of voyeurs, museum curators, medical students, researchers, and professors at such medical circuses grew progressively more intrusive as gaping, sketching, photographing, and ribald taunts led inexorably to physical violation. Spectators palpated and measured labia and penile lengths, and tittered as they asked demeaning questions about subjects' personal habits and sexual prowess. This prurience reached its height in the display of the Hottentot Venuses. Delta of Venus. Sartke Bartman. If one wonders how Ota Benga or anyone could have been clapped into a zoo in 20th century New York City, it is important to realize that there had been precedents. The most infamous medicalized display of a captive black befell Sartke, pronounced Sartke and meaning Little Sarah in Afrikaans, Bartman, who was born in 1789, the year the French Revolution produced the Declaration of the Rights of Man. Bartman was, like Benga, a member of the Khoisan hunter-gatherers. She lived at the southeastern Cape of Africa, in what is now South Africa. There, Bartman worked as a servant, perhaps an enslaved one, for Peter Cesar, a colonist who handed her over to British naval surgeon Dr. William Dunlop, who induced Bartman to sail with him to London in 1810. He assured her that she could quickly make her fortune, but Dunlop intended himself to be the beneficiary of her European debut. Bartman did not know she was about to enter an arena where she would become an object of unbridled medical curiosity and physical lust. Since the late 17th century, the Khoi had been regarded as the missing link between human and ape species. Theories that ranked ethnic groups consistently placed Bartman's Khoi people, like Otabangas, at the bottom of the evolutionary scale. On the basis of their supposedly overdeveloped genitals, Linnaeus classified the Khoi as a divergent branch of humanity, one that he named Homo monstrosus monorchidae, relegating them to the back alleys of evolution. In 1839, Samuel Morton described the Hottentot as the nearest approximation to the lower animals. Buffon classed them with the monkeys. Khoi women's dramatically endowed figures, and especially their large, fleshy buttocks, medically termed steatopegia, were seen as markers for their sexual prowess. Francis Galton, the father of eugenics, waxed rhapsodic about the extravagant figures of these women, declaring that they must be the envy of European belles. A popular ditty observed that the black African had not wit nor honesty to cover once his tail, hinting how much the Victorians had inferred about morality and intelligence from the relative nakedness of Africans. Most scientists agreed that the hot, damp tropical climate created a licentiousness and sexual profligacy in African women that was unknown among European women. The ascendance of medical theories about the alien attributes of black women had created a strongly sexualized interest in Khoi women. In an 1819 Dictionary of Medical Science essay, ethnologist J.J. Verret described black women as possessing a voluptuousness and degree of lascivity far beyond any known to whites. Abetted by their knowledge that many African peoples practiced female circumcision, scientists believed that African women in general, and Khoi women in particular, had oversized inner labia that hung down when they stood. Dunlop had accordingly arranged to put Bartman's body under anatomical scrutiny. Men of science made pilgrimages to London's academic and medical settings to sketch, measure, and endlessly analyze her steatopegious buttocks and her extended inner labia, which they dubbed the Hottentot apron, or the sinus pudoris, Latin for veil of shame. Her body suffered regular violations that alternated between rape and the most intimate of medical examinations. One wonders whether she discerned much difference between them. She was displayed nude or bedecked in animal skins with accoutrements, spears and bones, that her handlers thought fitting for a Hottentot, as her people were disparagingly called by Europeans. Hottentot is an onomatopoeic name invented by early Dutch colonists to describe the inimitable clicking sounds of the Khoi language, but Westerners applied the term imprecisely to all short Southern Africans. Even Bartman's name was stripped from her and replaced with the sardonic sobriquet Hottentot Venus, and she was often portrayed with Cupid, the Western embodiment of carnal attraction, perched on her ample buttocks. Thus, in stark contrast to the real white Venus of sublime but unattainable beauty, Bartman embodied not only the boundary between man and animal, but also the lure of the bestial, the base, the grotesquely hypersexual. Bartman was not the only African woman to be exhibited as a Hottentot Venus, but she became an important exemplar of the medically exploitative display of black peoples. One may be tempted to think that the display of Africans such as Bartman is unconnected to the plight of their enslaved American contemporaries, but medical scientists viewed them as the same peoples. This era saw the burgeoning of academic ethnology, that branch of anthropology devoted to the study of race, and what scientists thought true of Africans was also believed of American Negroes. There was some biological and much social basis to this belief. Although many African Americans sprang from an admixture of African, European, and Native American forebears, approximately 1 in 10 American blacks was a Native African, even after slave importation officially ended about 1810. Also, exhibited Africans were often black Americans who had been given manufactured exotic origins. But perhaps most important was the stubborn social denial of the widespread black-white intermingling in America. Thus, scientists insisted that what could be said of Bartman applied equally to her enslaved sisters in America. Over the next 5 years, Bartman met with much rougher usage. She was made to stand naked at parties of the wealthy and to impersonate a chained animal in garish Piccadilly, where the mob paid $1 a head to gape and shout vulgarities. They began by staring at her in disgust, progressed to laughing at her, and ended by being aroused by her. Because black women were considered as shameless as European women were modest and chaste, such behavior was possible, even for Victorian gentlemen. Many accounts of Bartman's life insist that she was a completely helpless victim of European impresarios. But in 1810, Robert Wedderburn of Jamaica, founder of London's African Association, complained to the authorities that Bartman was being demeaned. Interestingly, Bartman denied before an English court that she was being held against her will, and indicated that she appeared in order to earn a share of the attraction's profits. However, no contract was produced, and she probably received little or nothing of the hoped-for profits, so she certainly was exploited. The next phase of her life left no room for ambiguous hopes. In 1814, London theater impresario Henry Taylor took her to Paris, where he paraded her in degrading animalistic displays and circuses amid the talking pigs, animal monsters, and human oddities. Taylor sold Bartman to an animal trainer named Rowe, who provided her final descent when she was forced into a cage and made to behave like a wild beast. In 1815, the last year of her life, Bartman began drinking heavily, which may have contributed to her death from infectious illness at 27. Western medicine was not finished with its Hottentot Venus. In 1817, Baron Georges Cuvier, the French zoologist and physiologist who founded the field of comparative anatomy, dissected her body. He was not an objective observer, having already been convinced of her people's inferiority. Their color is black, their hair crimped, their heads squashed and their noses flat. Their protruding mouths and thick lips are strikingly similar to those of the apes. The peoples which compose this race have always been savages. Cuvier cast Bartman's body in plaster in 1817, preserved her brain, vulva, and anus in glass jars, then stripped the flesh from her skeleton and hung it on display in Paris's Musée de l'Homme. He noted, "She had a way of pouting her lips exactly like that we have observed in the orangutan. Her lips were monstrously large. Her ear was like that of many apes, being small, the tragus, the bit of cartilage that partially covers the opening of the ear, weak. These are animal characters." Cuvier had once noted that Bartman possessed a tenacious memory. She also spoke Dutch, English, and French. Yet he left her this final assessment: "These races with depressed and compressed skulls are condemned to a never-ending inferiority." Dissecting History. Joyce Heth. No discussion of racialized American circus hucksterism can ignore the legendary P.T. Barnum, who exhibited many blacks. In 1835, however, Barnum was just a 25-year-old bankrupt, eking out a living in a New York City dry goods store. Joyce Heth catapulted Barnum to national fame after he purchased her from R.W. Lindsay, a promoter who had been unable to capitalize on the manufactured identity he had created for Heth as a superannuated mammy of former President George Washington, who had died in 1799 but had already achieved political deity. We do not know Heth's actual origins, and Barnum's unreliable memoirs spin an assortment of contradictory tales, but he was able to convince audiences of Heth's manufactured African origin and more. Heth debuted on August 10, 1835, at Niblo's Garden in New York, and was a huge success as Barnum barked the tale of the greatest natural and national curiosity in the world, the black woman who had held the father of our country, her dear little George, to her breast, had given him suck, and who had taught him Negro spirituals. The claim that Heth had been Washington's nurse entailed an even more incredible assertion. Barnum swore that she was 161 years old, and many believed this. Heth's unusually black body helped to deflect skeptics because it was gnarled by a breathtaking decrepitude that simultaneously thrilled and repelled. For Heth was skeletal. Barnum claimed she weighed only 46 pounds. Both legs and one arm were paralyzed, and her leathery skin was very deeply wrinkled. Her eyes were gone, the legacy of some unknown ailment. She was toothless, and her uncut, horny nails curved like talons. Confronted with this grotesque sight, even lay spectators indulged in a medical gaze, touching her systematically, feeling the depth of her wrinkles, and taking her pulse. Their descriptions consistently identified Heth both with Africa and with death. Indeed, she is a mere skeleton covered with skin, and her whole appearance very much resembles a mummy of the days of the pharaohs, taken entire from the tombs of the catacombs of Egypt, declaimed one pseudonymous eyewitness. Even newspapers that avidly covered Heth's subsequent 7 months of appearances throughout the southern and mid-Atlantic states gravely discussed the merits of her claim to longevity, and some mused on its medical significance. The Evening Star, for example, averred that such longevity as Heth enjoyed was rare among northern blacks, but common in the South, their native habitat. That the sensationalist penny press should have devoted articles to the fantastic debate is unsurprising, but so did sixpenny Whig papers that were usually inclined to greater sophistication and skepticism. But because many viewers refused to believe she was really 161 years old, Barnum announced that, upon her death, she would be publicly autopsied by a physician to determine whether she was a hoax. Of course, Barnum knew she was a hoax because she was his hoax. The voice spinning the fictional history was his. Joyce Heth is unquestionably the most astonishing and interesting curiosity in the world. She was the slave of Augustine Washington, the father of General Washington, and was the first person to put clothes on the unconscious infant who was destined to lead our heroic fathers on to glory, to victory, and to freedom. To use her own language when speaking of her young master, George Washington, she raised him. Joyce Heth was born on the island of Madagascar, on the coast of Africa, in the year of 1674, and has consequently now arrived at the astonishing age of 161 years. The appearance of this modern relic of antiquity strikes the beholder with amazement, and convinces him that his eyes are resting upon the oldest specimen of mortality they ever before held. Mortality was a revealing, even Freudian choice of words, because Heth's death was eagerly awaited, for only afterward could Barnum stage her public dissection. In fact, in Barnum's bogus memoirs, he described her as a remarkably old Negro woman who was swindling my friend, her former owner R.W. Lindsay, by her disgusting pertinacity to cling to life at his expense. Heth died the next year, on February 19, 1836. Barnum at first confirmed his belief in Heth's incredible age, but he soon announced that he had arranged for an autopsy in order to produce a scientific determination of the truth. Heth guaranteed Barnum's fame and fortune when he commissioned New York City surgeon David L. Rogers, M.D., to dissect her publicly, a spectacle for which he sold 50-cent tickets. On February 25, 1836, 1,500 spectators crowded New York's City Saloon, whose exhibition center had been transformed into an operating room for the occasion, her very public dissection. The autopsy's real attraction was an unstinting satisfaction of curiosity about her fantastic body, without niceties or guilt. After all, one had paid for the privilege of vicariously participating in this scientific investigation. 40 years earlier, Charles Caldwell's examination of Henry Moss's racial distinctiveness had been supposedly voluntary, restrained, private, and non-invasive. However, Heth's was a bloodily invasive circus, and no one even asked whether she had consented. As historian Bernard Rice has noted, this important performance was both a titillating public entertainment and a pivotal scientific event that prefigured the dissections that would soon become commonplace with the bodies of African Americans. In the end, Rodgers declared that Heth was a fraud, because despite her physical disabilities, her relatively clear cardiac arteries proved that she could have been no more than 80 years old. Barnum reacted with an assortment of bold hoaxes. He visited New York Herald editor James Gordon Bennett to claim that the autopsy had been performed not upon Joyce Heth, but upon an aged black Harlemite named Aunt Nellie. Barnum assured the Herald editors that Heth was actually alive and well and being readied for a European tour. The Herald took the bait. The New York Sun did not, and the city's newspapers endlessly discussed and debated the results and meanings of the autopsy in warring accounts, accusing one another of falsifying accounts, of misinterpreting the autopsy's evidence, and of having been duped by Barnum. Barnum finally admitted that Heth was indeed dead, but the journalistic furor took 18 months to abate, during which time Barnum bamboozled yet another paper into publishing one of several divergent histories of Heth that he had fabricated. In one of these accounts, Barnum described how he had compelled Heth to masquerade as Washington's old nurse. I soon got Joyce into training, and from a devil of a termagant, converted into a most docile creature, as willing to do my bidding as the slave of the lamp was to obey Aladdin. I discovered her weak point, whiskey. Her old master, of course, would indulge an old bedridden creature in no such luxury, and for a drop of it, I found I could mold her to anything. Among other things, Barnum related using her whiskey addiction to inebriate her so that he could pull all her teeth in order to make her look older. Moss had been a living symbol of how easily the boundaries between white and black were traversed, but the owners of later racial exhibits, such as Heth, stressed the rigidity, not the fluidity, of the barrier between black and white by stressing, or manufacturing, the distinctly alien nature of black bodies. Around 1840, entrepreneurs realized that a market hungered for black exotica, and they took a leaf from the physician's book by displaying blacks as medical curiosities. Some were unquestionably enslaved, but other attractions were free blacks. All, however, were kept in quasi-legal bondage. A few black Barnum attractions had no especially racial component, such as Madame Aboma, the 7-foot-9-inch African giantess, née Ella Williams, a former domestic from Eastover, South Carolina, or the enslaved Siamese twins known as Millie Christine, the two-headed girl. But for most quasi-scientific oddities, blackness was an integral part of their significance, such as a gaggle of unkempt black slaves who posed as wild men of Borneo, and of course Heth. In these cases, medical display was more than entertainment. It was also a dramatic argument for the alien inferiority of black bodies. Anonymous wild men have sometimes been surgically altered to resemble animal-human hybrids, such as Calvin Bird, who fled a circus and appeared at a Syracuse hospital, asking to have his surgically implanted horns removed. A supposedly mute black denizen of the wilds of South Africa, with a very small head, was enigmatically labeled Zip, the what is it, or merely Zip. He was actually the normally verbal William Henry Johnson of Bound Brook, New Jersey. Such men were afflicted with microcephalia, a congenital disorder with no racial element, which is typically manifested by a small misshapen head and lowered intelligence. However, according to their exhibit placards and carnival barkers, they represented the typical subhuman inhabitants of obscure African lands, some of whom did not enjoy the power of speech. Circuses also displayed blacks with disfiguring medical conditions, such as elephantiasis. This parasitic infection blocks the circulation of lymph, causing lymphedema, in which affected limbs and digits swell to monstrous size. Elephantiasis sometimes causes the genitalia to swell, and black men with gargantuan penises and testes could be seen not only in the pages of medical journals, but also behind the veils of circus tents. Blind Tom, a black mathematical prodigy, was exhibited by his physician owner for years and became famous for his ability to make fiendishly complex calculations more rapidly and exactly than the scholars of his time. He was, however, an idiot savant, incapable of the ordinary tasks of everyday life. Because he was black, his condition was often used to illustrate the deleterious effects of intense thought upon the inferior minds of blacks. But the intellectual histories of these exhibited subjects were often falsified, just as their life histories and bodies were. For example, Thomas Bethune, a slave born around 1850 near Columbus, Georgia, was ballyhooed as an untaught musical freak of nature. Actually, Bethune was a trained musical prodigy who gave piano concerts throughout the South as a child and had performed for President James Buchanan at age 8. Bethune was proficient in the classical repertoire and capable of complex harmonic inventions. He played popular music superbly too, but rather than being regarded as an American Mozart, he was relegated to circuses and minstrel shows. He enriched his owners, but died penniless in 1908. A few attractions appeared voluntarily. In the Free States, some were former $2-a-week roustabouts who realized that they could earn more as an exhibit than by engaging in back-breaking labor. Louis Agassiz, M.D., the Swiss-born naturalist, was in 1850 one of the most famous scientists in America. He was also more forthright than most in describing the physical revulsion that blacks evoked in him. He was a protege of Cuvier, and in 1846, when he emigrated to the United States and a professorship in biology at Harvard, he was immediately drawn to Philadelphia to view Dr. Samuel Morton's American Golgotha, a collection of 660 white, Indian, Eskimo, and Negro skulls. Agassiz was opposed to enslavement and had originally believed that whites and blacks shared a species and a single origin. But upon his first encounters with blacks in Philadelphia, he wrote to his mother, "All the domestics in my hotel were men of color. I can scarcely express to you the painful impression that I received, especially since the feeling that they inspired in me is contrary to all our ideas about the confraternity of the human type and the unique origin of our species. I experienced pity at the sight of this degraded and degenerate race. It is impossible for me to repress the feeling that they are not of the same blood as us. In seeing their black faces with thick lips and grimacing teeth, the wool on their heads, their bent knees, their elongate heads, their large curved nails, and especially the livid color of their palms, I could not take my eyes off their face in order to tell them to stay far away. God preserve us from such a contact." Apparently spurred by his viscera, Agassiz changed his mind about the confraternity of the human type and decided that blacks must have evolved separately from whites. The aforementioned antebellum scientific theory called polygenism, the belief in multiple origins for different races. However, his revulsion was mixed with a fascinated attraction. How else can one explain the many beautiful, ambiguously erotic daguerreotype images Agassiz had made of nude or half-nude African Americans in Columbia, South Carolina in 1850? The scientific rationale for these 15 detailed images by daguerreotypist Joseph T. Zeeley was the scientist's search for graphic evidence to bolster his polygynist conversion. The silver daguerreotype plates included frontal and side views of 7 Southern slaves, both men and women, and these did emphasize physiognomic features such as head shape, profile, and stance. However, these images also pay tribute to an undeniable beauty and celebrates the very bodies Agassiz decried as bestial. Like pornography, the daguerreotype images of black women reinforced the conventional representation of the black woman as a hypersexual being under the control of a white owner. For example, the women's clothes were pulled below their waists and breasts, and their nudity signaled sexual laxity and degradation, especially in contrast with the copious layers of protective clothing in which white women were always depicted. Branding, lash marks, piercings, and other marks of oppression and ownership were common and served to confuse the biological and social markings of inferiority. But in addition to clear markings of ownership, subjects often assumed erotic poses, indicating that they were also sexually available. Many other Southern scientists and physicians, including Thomas Jefferson, wrote of their abhorrence of the black body, but their actions testify to its attractions. Some of the scientists who catalogued and gaped at black bodies enjoyed sexual relationships with their black slaves and mistresses. Their concept of the Negro freak encapsulated simultaneous feelings of revulsion and attraction. Being men of science, they medicalized these feelings. In 1908, the New York Medical Journal observed, "In most civilized countries, there are now enacted laws forbidding the public exhibition of monsters and revolting deformities. The genuine lusus naturae, trick of nature, is, however, always a valuable subject of study for the scientific physician, which may add to our knowledge of development of normal types, and may possibly illuminate many difficult and obscure problems in pathology." Thus, scientists justified in themselves the fascination they condemned in others, casting their own fascination with the black body as a medically important entity that represented the boundary between normal and abnormal, healthy and pathological, human and subhuman, and sometimes between black and white. But not just any black body. For exhibits, the normal bodies of healthy American blacks would not do. Exotica sold, particularly bodies with grotesque anomalies and malformations. Scientists invested heavily in public displays, too. They desired evidence to sell the larger American public on medicalized racial inferiority theories that were already well entrenched in the slave-holding South. Many scientists who were enamored of Charles Darwin's 1859 theory that posited how apes and men sprang from a common ancestor also believed in an embellishment, that a continuous chain of evolution linked apes and men, and that the subhuman missing link was still extant. Scientists swarmed Africa in search of candidate subhumans. They found them and displayed them to the world.
And that's where we will pick up at for the second audio segment, Context of White Supremacy. Again, book study session, Harriet A. Washington, Medical Apartheid. Fascinating read. If folks have comments you would like to share, observations, feel free. The number to dial, 641-715-3640. The code 564-943#. The number again, 641-715-3640. The code 564-943#. Press star 6 if you would like to participate. If you do not want to dial in using your phone, you can use the free VOPE line. It works anywhere in the world. The link is on the Black Talk Radio Network page. If you need the address, it is tiny, TINY.cc/1 race, and that is the number 1. Address again, tiny, TINY.cc/1 race. That is the number 1. When you put in that address, click the link on the left of the page. It says free VOPE line. Once you do that, it will open a small window on your screen. On the first line, it is a drop-down menu. Select the number that I just gave out, which again is 641-715-3640. Next line, it will ask for the code. That code again is 564943. Last line, it will ask for a name. You can put in your real name, nickname, press random keys, whatever you're comfortable with. Once you get all that information entered, click the green button at the bottom. It will connect you to the live program. You will hear an audio prompt to press the number 1 if you want to speak, right? Once you click the green button at the bottom, you'll be connected. You should be able to hear us. If you want to speak, you'll see the dial pad on your screen. Press *6. Then you'll hear that audio prompt. Press the number 1, and we will get you on the line. Right on. All the folks who dialed in who have commentary, we will get to you immediately. So we should have, let's see. Caller at 5992, Roz, Thomason, New York. The caller at 2960, and the caller at 9325. All of you should be with us. I'll look for other hands as I see them. Somebody else just dialed in as well. You should be with us also.
Good evening. Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Good evening, Gus. Good evening to all the callers. I just had a few observations from the reading. This is a very good book so far. Sounds like the blacks were more superior, and the whites knew it. They were immune to, they had large extremities. They were immune to certain diseases that white people weren't able to fight off, and they also they realized that they weren't a good specimen to do surgeries or experiments on after a while, because whites couldn't take the same amount of punishment. So I just, thought that was very interesting, because they still went on to classify us as less as humans, even as they're figuring out that we're way more a dominant species. Then, the pygmy Benga in the zoo, just so tragic. You're talking about a person from a civilization that's, way older than the white civilizations are. The smartest person ever to live, probably Imhotep, was someone who would resemble Benga. So, these aren't some stupid people. And, these aren't people that are close to animals. This is a very highly developed civilization, even though they don't have the technology of the whites, but they're way more advanced mentally and spiritually. But to put them in a cave with the animals, and I probably would have shot myself in the head too if that happened to me, knowing that I'm a more dominant person than even these people that got me in the cave. So I just thought that was interesting. The whites women lusted by the apes. It kind of reminded me of King Kong and sort of the Tarzan. And they have a new Tarzan commercial. And just very interesting now after hearing that segment and looking at that commercial. And it's just very interesting. On the Sarah Bartman part, Beyonce is supposed to be playing her in a movie. That's what I heard. Tragic, terrible, probably just as bad as being probably more psychologically scarring. And it just showed a white sexual mentality to pay money to go and look at a naked black woman, to yell at her, then to laugh at her, then to get aroused by her. I mean, I wonder what happened next, Just disgusting. And for people to think that they're so much more superior and these people are so low down on the evolutionary scale, they don't mind having sex with them. I mean, so that just shows, their ability to have sex with animals, pretty much. I mean, if that's what the Hottentrots and things were, why would they want to have sex with them if they're such more sophisticated people? Spend so much time on trying to figure out the African origins, why they have the bent knees, the elongated penises, the longer labias, and but they're not trying to figure out their origin. They think they come from Adam and Eve. I mean, it's it's such a fascination. And I mean, I heard Phil Valentine say, I heard Bobby Hemmett say, I've heard almost every Dr. King, Dr. Barnes. I mean, they all say that melanin is the most studied thing in the whole world. They have whole conferences on studying, us. I mean, it is still to this day. They thought the black women were sex freaks because they wore no clothes, but it just shows how savage the whites are. White women during the same time period were walking around with chastity belts in Europe. Only their father or their husband had the key to, because white women were getting raped so much by white men in Europe. And the African women walked around nude. The African men walked around nude. There were no raping. No brothers walking around with a heart on. It was just a lot of respect, even though they were nude and they couldn't understand it. Lastly, they said the black women were freaks for white men, and they were associating that to the American. Also, let's keep in mind that when you're a slave and you don't have the right to say no, I guess you would be a freak. And I'll mute my line.
Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Greetings to you, Gus, Thomas in New York, and all the other callers and listeners. This book just keeps getting better and better, and some of these stories are just really something else. I'll start on page 73, where Dr. Washington writes, can we judge 18th century doctors for experimenting on blacks? A common apology for experimental abuse insists that we should not apply present-day medical ethics to the medical behaviors of yesterday, which were governed by less enlightened medical standards for everyone, not just African Americans. However, ethical strictures did govern the behavior of 19th century physicians before the mid-20th century. These binding ethical standards were not enforced by federal laws, but consisted of medical oaths, professional codes, and rules governing clinical conduct within medical schools, hospitals, and other institutions. These rules were carefully adhered to in cases of white patients, but routinely broken for African Americans. This is a very interesting passage. I say that we should judge them because they are racist white supremacists who are using science as a means to literally terrorize and commit genocide against black people. When you study African variations of medical science, whether it's the Yoruba in Nigeria, who actually they had the deity Babalu Aye was actually the deity in charge of smallpox. And that was the deity that was petitioned to whenever any sorts of pathological illnesses, viruses would come through specific areas in Nigeria. And matter of fact, their priests were so adept at curing the smallpox, they were also adept at using it to attack other people, whether they were at war with them and other things. Those priests knew how to utilize that virus to attack their enemies, and they had the cure for it. And then if you go back to the Nile Valley, essentially we had the most complex medical system ever, and we did not utilize all of these different techniques of getting people drunk and horribly dissecting people and violently doing those sorts of things. Most of the knowledge that Africans procured about the human body, they procured during the mummification process. And for those who didn't know it, Imhotep, as renowned as he was, both his mother and father were also physicians before him. So I just wanted to put that out there. But also, yes, on page 70, they speak about the story of the tragic story of the ancestor Oda Benga. And to piggyback off of what Thomas in New York was talking about, the Mbuti people, actually there's a great documentary that was done by PBS called First Peoples. And when they did the genetic studies of Africa, what they found was, first of all, the Mbuti, the Twa, the Hutu, and all the other diminutive blacks have genetics that go back over 6 million years, and they are modern humans. So in other words, the humans that go back supposedly 200,000 years ago are what we would call taller black people. But the original black people, what they found genetically was that these diminutive blacks, their genetics go back 6 million years and plus, which means we were here a lot longer than what we're being told. And like Thomas in New York said, these people were some of the most brilliant people that ever existed before we encountered white people. And their societies were completely destroyed and eradicated. And what we saw happen to Oda Benga and what's still happening to us today are just the remnants of our contact with white people. Oh, here we go. Yes, the section where they talk about, oh my goodness, where this is on page 78, where they talk about, they said, scientists allege apes prefer to mate with black women just as black men lusted after white women, their own evolutionary betters. When they said that scientists allege that apes prefer to mate with black women, just especially due to our prior conversation about white people having fur, I thought of white people. So white people are the apes who are raping black women. And there's no way that a melanin-deficient mutant could ever be the better of anyone of African descent. Oh, this section was very telling. It's on page 80. They write, Moss became a familiar figure even in Europe, where his piebald visage graced chocolates and German almanacs. President George Washington was a face in the throng when Moss appeared at Mr. Leach's Tavern, a sign of the Black Horse in Philadelphia in 1796. So were prominent racial theorists of the day, including Reverend Samuel Stanhope Smith and an entranced Benjamin Rush, M.D., who is now remembered as the father of American psychiatry and who then believed that black skin was the manifestation of a type of leprosy he called negritude. Calling blacks lepers certainly sounds like the pronouncement of an inveterate racist. This is how Rush is sometimes regarded. However, Rush was not a racist, but a passionate abolitionist, and his views of black physiology were nuanced. Rush believed that blacks were diseased, but that they could be cured. He welcomed the various albinos, leucothiotes, and vitiligo-stricken white Negroes as hopeful monsters, living proof that blacks could become healthily white. Cure was desirable, averred Rush, because eliminating black skin would eliminate the chief social and religious argument for enslavement, and because he believed blacks themselves preferred white skin. Wow. This just speaks volumes to everything Dr. Welsing has ever discussed in reference to the psychopathology of white people and their aversion to genetic annihilation. It's essentially what they've done is they're scientifically attempting to normalize melanin deficiency because they know that that is a genetic mutated state, which is a degradation to the original dark black genome. And it is just amazing how they use everything possible to scientifically make themselves better than everyone else when everything that they have ever encountered in reference to people of African descent proves that we are the pinnacle of everything the Creator said when he said, let us make God in our image and after our likeness, as they write in the Bible. And it's just very interesting how they switch everything around. And this, I think, was just the greatest attempt to try and normalize melanin deficiency, which really speaks again to the brilliance of Dr. Welsing. The following page, she writes, although Caldwell was careful to note that he obtained Moss's permission, one has only Caldwell's word that Moss willingly accepted the loss of autonomy, social status, and income in exchange for suitable but healthily monitored lodgings. I am not convinced. In part, this scenario evokes an eerie parallel to one of the most infamous exploitative experimental relationships in history, that between Alex St. Martin, a poor, illiterate French-Canadian backwoods trapper, Dr. William Beaumont, who used him as an experimental subject for 11 years, beginning in 1822. St. Martin was a consistently reluctant subject, but Beaumont portrayed him as a willing one. Also, Caldwell's veracity is suspect. In his 1855 memoirs, for example, he falsely claimed that Mouse's skin, had regained its color. This section just proves that white people lie about everything, and wherever they claim to have gotten consent, more than likely they either raped the person or forced them in some form or fashion to do what they wanted. And also, on that previous paragraph that I read, she seems to be confused when she wrote that Rush is not a racist but a passionate abolitionist. He couldn't be more racist than what that one paragraph said. So for her to even rationalize his racism, to me, just shows her confusion. And I just wanted to kind of bring that out as well. And then I'm almost done. There's a section on page 83. It says, Khoi women's dramatically endowed figures, especially their large fleshy buttocks, medically termed steatopygia, were seen as markers for their sexual prowess. Francis Galton, the father of eugenics, waxed rhapsodic about the extravagant figures of these women, declaring they must have been the envy of European belles. A popular ditty observed that the black African had not wit nor honesty to cover once his tail, hinting how much the Victorians had inferred about the morality and intelligence from the relative nakedness of Africans. Most scientists agreed that the hot, damp, tropical climate created a licentious and sexual profligacy in African women that was unknown among European women. And this is just very interesting because the large buttocks of the Khoisan or the San people and the other diminutive blacks is actually a way of them. It actually functions similar to the hump on a camel because they do not come into contact with food very often. A lot of what they eat is stored as fat in their buttocks, and in those lean times, they're able to live off of that fat. That's the scientific reason for them having that feature. And also, if you look at white women's dresses back in the 1800s, where they make them with the big waist and the big frills, it was actually to mirror the bodies of African women. So their dresses were meant to mirror the so-called Hottentots that they were abusing and chopping up and putting on display, sadly. And
we'll leave it there so we can nab some of the other folks who dialed in.
Yes.
We should have time to get your final comments in as well.
No problem. Thank you.
For sure. Other folks who dialed in that we haven't heard from, did you all have comments as well?
May I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Hello, everyone. My name is Martha. I just want to piggyback on what the young man was talking about when he was speaking of Benjamin Rush. I think when we label white folks racist supremacists, I think we're doing them a kindness, because I really believe these people are extremely psychotic. I mean, they're in any century, any time on the planet. And what I'm looking at with Benjamin Rush is that it says that, he said that he was not a racist, but his theories were racist. So I'm having a difficult time trying to distinguish the difference. And to couple that, I always had in my mind that abolitionists were not racist, that these were the people who wanted to free our people. But reading this passage about Benjamin Rush not being racist but yet had racist theories and he was an abolitionist, it just changes my whole paradigm. Because I don't see how you cannot be racist but yet your theories are racist. So if anyone can want to comment on that, I would really appreciate it.
If we can grab the other people who we have not heard from, if you all want to share, if you want to respond to her question, that'll be great. And then after we get to the people who have not commented yet, if people who've already spoken, if they want to comment on that, we'll see if we have time for that also. Unless you had anything else, Martha.
No.
Right on. Other people that we have not heard from, if you all had commentary?
Yes, can I be heard?
Let's get Mr. Demery forward.
All right, greetings, Gus. Greetings to the other callers, listeners. I'll address the female callers. I guess confusion on races. I think Mr. Fuller does not believe that all white people are racist. He says that for white people, they are racist, but all racists are white. You know, and I don't think the host agrees with that, and I don't agree with it. I think that they're all racist, and I think that there may be degrees of practicing racism or degrees of racist by commission and omission. The same comes out to the same thing. Dr. Benjamin Rush was definitely a racist, and I haven't heard of anyone in this book, any white person in this book, that don't qualify as a racist. But back to my commentary: violence, pain, and shame, and legal bondage. It's, you know, it was accustomed to mistreat, abuse, and experiment, torture black people, whether it was therapeutical or non-therapeutical. Black bodies was used as lab specimens. And I drew a comparison on the victims, Oda Binga, Sarah Bartman, and Joyce Het. You know, they all show a pattern of white people's behavior, whereas they all showed some degree of trust towards white people and was later deceived. You know, Oda Binga, you know, whether that story is correct or not, we don't know, because we know that Verna made up several stories, you know, and he gave different accounts of how he acquired Oda Binga. But let's just say, for the sake of the book, that that's the way that it happened. You can imagine somebody, the trauma somebody experiences when they come back, and not only have their family been killed and the village is burnt, but all of his entire community, all of his relatives are gone. And then being shown a little bit of kindness, you know, by trading with the slavers, this doctor, or no, he was a minister, got him for some salt and a piece of cloth. You know, that may have been interpreted as a kind act, and Oda Binga may have had some degree of trust for this guy, which evidently, you know, led to his torture and demise. The Reverend Dr. MacArthur tried and failed to persuade the mayor to release the man who was suffering tremendous degrees of racism. And the elderly lady that was P.T. Barnum's exhibit, and she was supposed to be 161 years old, was George Washington's grandmother, whatever, something that he made up. They all had some degree of trust of white people and was later deceived. She was, alcohol was used, you know, and we know how alcohol is used in violence against blacks, and the host always says that sobriety would be best. and that if you're in the company of white people and they're drinking alcohol, be very careful. These people were, racism was practiced on them in life and even in death. After they died, it was written that Oda Binker was buried in Lynchburg, Virginia, but his body was removed. They don't have any marked grave of Oda Binker right now. They don't know what happened to his body, but Sarah Bartland was dissected publicly. Her genitals and everything was removed and put into jars and put on display in museums. And the elderly lady, who was actually only about 80-something when she died, they publicly dissected her also. So we have this violence, sexual violence, and then just brutal mutilation of the body even after death. No respect for the dead. I have one portion of the book that I'd like to comment on, and it was a part to where I guess the physicians, the scientists, government, state officials, all were collaborating in this objectification of black bodies, and it was setting the foundation for the way that black people would be treated in the system of white supremacy. But it says that the journalists were becoming involved, and they took a swipe at creationism. It did not address Gardner's immediate concern, but it hit a nerve among many whites who shared Gardner's outrage. Okay, now, number one, you had some were angered by this inhumane insult to blacks. And two, there were others who opposed the teaching of Darwin's theory of evolution and was afraid that Binger's dramatic presence would offer a powerful Fabian argument for the theory of evolution. So even in that part right there, although they may have been outraged, they wasn't outraged to the point to where there was any protest. Anyone tried to break him out. They tried to do anything for him. And as far as his humanity goes, there was no mention of how he felt and what his thoughts were. None of those people that were exhibited. And just because you don't feel like something is right, if you're agreeing with it, you're complicit in it also. And if 40,000 people was coming on Sunday to watch him, if Oda Binga had only had a quarter or even a dime of those that was coming to see him, he would not have died in obscurity, and he may have been saved from a bout with suicide. So I'll mute my line on that. Thanks for taking the call, Gus.
For sure. There was the caller that was speaking up at the same time that Mr. Demery Ford began. If you want to proceed.
May I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Greetings, Gus, and greetings to all the callers, listeners. I was listening to the whole commentary. I'm not quite clear on, the names and stuff like that, but I was listening, especially to the part where the African woman was on display, not the one that was supposedly taking care of George Washington, but the one who she was. I was getting that she was a voluptuous woman. She was appealing, visually. I forget her name, but it automatically took me to while I was growing up, real young, maybe like 10, 11 years old. I had a intense interest in serial killers. Where did they come from? You know what I mean? Where did it, like, just all of a sudden out of nowhere, just killing slews of people and, having no remorse and things like that. I studied from Gacy to Bundy to the Strangler and just all these guys. And, I got to a certain point where I thought a lot of it happened because of that time around Vietnam, when the soldiers going over and the protests against the war and the experimentations and things like that. But now that I understand racism, white supremacy, I've got some knowledge on some things. I don't know how accurate it is, but I forget the guy's name, but he wrote a book speaking about the separation from the times of Pangea, when it was nothing but African people there, and we migrated out to different parts of the world because the landmass was connected. And as the separation began, some of us got separated and got into that room of ice, the ice age, I guess is what they call it. Behind that 13-mile block of ice, trapped, can't do anything, go anywhere. And as Dr. Browder said, they lost their soul, they lost their melanin, they lost their mind. And I can't remember the name of the man who wrote this book, but he was speaking about in detail the changes that they went through, how the white man's phallus shrunk because of the cold nature of his environment, and I think I'm saying it accurately, their women, the buttocks got flatter from sitting on ice, on flatness. Their diets changed. The heads became bigger for, I forget what reason, the child's head. So the woman's hips had to spread out more. By him having a smaller phallus, he couldn't satisfy. There was always a conflict of dominance in that shell where they were. And I think this is the birth of racism. This is the birth of because rape is not about sex, it's about dominance and power. And I think that's where it comes from, dominating their other half at those times. But in those times of the Ice Age. But also his counterpart dominating him because he can't satisfy her. She can't be satisfied, not by him. And I think that, as they came out in the book or whatever, the people from Caucasus Mountains or the people from the mountains or something like that, how they came out with this deviant mind, this not just a mind but a way of life, or just a deviance in them. And fast forward to today, I that's where all the rapists and the molesters and that whole mentality and that lifestyle of that, I think that's where it was born from, because as it was said, Africans walked around free, swinging and banging and, breasts out, behind out, it was, but no heart on, no, I can't control myself type of behavior. But you go in European culture and you see these things, and I really feel like that's where it comes from, the putting black people on as spectacles to look at, and look at how they butt look and all that stuff, and look how long their appendages are, and how muscular, but they smell. It's all kind of stuff. That's where it comes from, and unknowing, I think, because I think a lot of them, I don't agree with. None of them are racist. I believe that all of them are racist, because coded language through generations is just that. They may not even know that they're teaching their next generation racism in that way, but the code has been forced and ingrained in their society so much that it's regular talk. You know what I mean? But you're teaching racism at the same time. So, and I forget her name, and I'll end on this. I forget her name, but she also spoke about how throughout the years of what this book speaks on, medical apartheid, but in the years of slavery and the rape and the pillaging and the murder and the kidnap, all that type of stuff, nobody was prosecuted. Nobody was, to my knowledge, was made to pay by death or whatever, eye for an eye. None of that. It just went away. It just said, all right, you guys have to stop. Well, I don't think any of those things stopped. I think that just as it traveled through generations back then from the Ice Age, I think that it traveled from our time of slavery here, that it traveled through generations because nobody was made to stop. These people were secretly still doing these things that they did to the people that are being spoken about in the book, doing the same things, have been doing the same things, and won't stop because it is a part of their makeup from the time when they lost their souls. And I'll mute my line on that.
Other folks that we have not heard from, did you have commentary you wanted to share? Oh, did we get everybody? Everybody who had a hand up, been able to comment? Grand. I will assume seems like we had some other people who had a hand up who hadn't commented yet. If you want to get your comments in, you have about 20 minutes before we get to the next audio segment.
Can I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. This is Princess. I just wanted to make a quick comment or observation. To be quite honest, it's kind of hard for me to comment about this because I'm just actually trying to take it all in. So it's kind of hard to really comment about. I just hearing just the way that they described how they viewed or objectified, Black people's bodies. I think it's kind of hit home. And then I think last week when you guys had covered the first part of it, and they were talking about how they would go about blaming the mothers, Black females, for, them being so inferior and stuff. And it kind of dawned on me that even now that kind of still goes on in our society, whether we as Black females are hearing that from white males, as well as, unfortunately, most Black males, and, how that has kind of carried on throughout the generations. So, but I'm just listening because I really don't know how to respond or say anything on something like this.
Right on. Appreciate that, Princess. Anybody else that had commentary that they wanted to get in that we missed? Anybody who had a hand up that has not been able to comment yet? Okay. I will assume we got everybody. We have about 18 minutes until we get to the second audio segment. So if you have a comment that you want to get in, you should get your hand up soon, immediately, really, and we'll get it in if you want to speak before we do the second audio clip. Certainly this book is not easy reading. I would say many of the books that we have read that talk about the way that we have been terrorized, tortured under the system of white supremacy, they can be unsettling, highly unsettling. And I mean, I hope we are not just looking at this and thinking that, this, just a sad story or what have you. These are our ancestors. These are our family members. And a lot of this stuff, as you all have stated, this is still going on, just in different forms. So I certainly understand anyone who it's a difficult read. And I think it's intended to be. I think a lot of times we talk about racism, white supremacy. It is greatly sanitized. And that's at least one thing that I can appreciate about this work. It is not sanitized for the most part. She is just making it plain about what racism, white supremacy is, what it has been, how this all works. One of the things, I guess one of the first notes that I picked up when they were talking at the beginning, and I guess she talked about this last week, and many of the callers mentioned this, I think Thomas in New York, Roz, the extensive medical wisdom that Africans brought from the continent. I think we talked about that last week, how they were suppressed, ridiculed by these white butchers in their lab coats, and or them just plagiarizing this information, just we'll steal it and use it and act like we came up with this, which is standard racist operating procedure. But the portion, I'm just not going to give out the page numbers because I have the Kindle, so they won't match up if you have the book anyway, where it says they're talking about these inoculations that they got from a black person where they had been doing this on the continent, and the white people were mad that they got these inoculations from these Negroes. Like, how dare you, think that you're going to take this, where it says the fact that the inoculation work seemed not to play into physicians' assessments, and their bitter attacks were not confined to the intellectual sphere. A lighted grenade was thrown into Mather's house, along with a note declaring, "Cotton Mather, you dog, damn you, I'll inoculate you with this, with a pox to you." This prompted him to complain, "I don't know why it is more unlawful to learn of Africans how to help against the poison of the smallpox than it is to learn of our Indians how to help against the poison of a rattlesnake." In the end, the obvious reduction of deaths from 14% to less than 2%, convinced other doctors that inoculation was the city's savior. I think we talked on this program before. If you are a black person, demonstrating your competence, your skill, your insight means absolutely nothing to white supremacists at all. And I think people have talked about this, been confused about this on the job, just not understanding what it means to be white or the system of racism, white supremacy. But I mean, and this is them whites attacking other white people because just this is the contempt that we have for black people under the system of white supremacy. I thought that was a really important segment at the very beginning of the audio this week. I think Roz made the point, which I also thought was great. I don't have to read the paragraph again, but where they talked about how many people, you hear this not just within the context of medicine, but across the board, that, hey, now we should not think bad and judge what racists did 100 years ago or 200 years ago or 300 years ago. It was a different time. They had a different way of thinking. So, hey, we can't judge them by today's standards. And I think she brought out a great point just within the context of talking about medical experimentation, that there were rules in place of that time period, and those rules were observed when the patients were going to be whites. They were flagrantly disregarded with regards to black people. That, in my view, right there shows this is totally incorrect. They know this. That's one of the lamest excuses that I hear on a regular basis when people go to exonerate the raping, racist, torturing, terroristic white ancestors consistently. And we should be ready for a rebuke, even if you hear that from other non-white people, because it's very, very common, especially, I would say, in academic circles. Moving forward to Chapter 3, which we picked up on this week, about Adabinga. I can say I think you will have an even greater appreciation for the information in this book if you are already familiar with some of the people that she is talking about. I know we've done programs in the past. We focused almost exclusively on Adabinga. We've done several programs. We focused on Sarki Bartman. And even Joyce Heth, I think I mentioned last week. We were talking about lynching as spectacle. I mentioned P.T. Barnum, Joyce Heth. We did the program The Showman and the Slave by Benjamin Reese, suspected racist. That's his whole book is about what was happening with the origins of the circus in this area of the world. But just I think if you have more knowledge about these people, this is not the first time that you're coming to this information. I think you'll have an even greater appreciation for how she connects all of this with the medical abuse and torture of black people. Let's see, with Adabinga, I thought this reminded me of the late Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia, the portion where she says Adabinga is a normal specimen, where she's quoting, where she's quoting this racist Mayor McClellan talking about Adabinga, where she says, this is not Mayor McClellan, this is in the New York Times, where it says Adabinga is a normal specimen of his race or tribe with a brain as much developed as are those of its other members and can be studied with profit. The pygmies are an efficient people in their native forest, but they are very low in the human scale, and the suggestion that Benga should be in a school instead of a cage ignores the high probability that school would be a place of torture to him and one from which he could draw no advantage whatever. And this is not like 1800, 1700. This is at the beginning of the 20th century. I mean, this is not that long ago that this took place. That's number one. But as I said, Antonin Scalia, he just said basically the same thing right in December, weeks literally before he died, about the case where they were talking about affirmative action and saying, oh man, black people aren't that smart. We don't want them being in some highfalutin law school where they'll struggle and be tortured with their puny Negro brains. They need to be at some, smaller caliber school that's more efficient for, Negroes, and they're capable, their intellectual capabilities. Standard operating procedure where you just see the continuum of racist ideology and how whites think about black people. Let's see, later on in the chapter, where she says, but perhaps the most important was the stubborn social denial of the widespread black-white intermingling in America. The scientists insisted that what could be said of Bartman applied equally to her enslaved sisters in America. I just think that's important because this has been brought up repeatedly in the book already, the rape of black people. That's the way that just talking about accurate terms, this is not intermingling. This is rape. And I would even submit, even if we're talking this time period, even quote-unquote free black people probably don't have the ability to just say no to a white person. Consent, as we've been talking about, as she's laid out in this book, importantly. We should be using correct terms, and I just think frequently we're not talking about sexual intercourse in this manner under racism, white supremacy, as rape, as torture, as exploitation. We use a lot of terms. I think I started my commentary by saying I think I appreciate about this book that it's not sanitized. This is one aspect that is sanitized, unfortunately. This should be described as rape every single time because that's what it is. There was a footnote that I wanted to share. I don't know how many people do not have the book. This is another one that you should probably check the footnotes because she also is dropping a lot of Greek books and other references that you can check along the way about quote-unquote Hottentot Venus Sarkey Bartman. This is footnote number 42 from chapter 3, where she writes, until 1976, anyone could view the plaster cast and preserved skeleton, vulva, anus, and brain as a set of publicly exhibited medical trophies in Paris's Musée de l'Homme. But when Bartman's homeland, now the Republic of South Africa, rescinded apartheid and white minority rule, in language, it began vigorously requesting the return of her remains. The French responded by relegating the remains to more private rooms where scientists, racists, were able to view them undisturbed until 2001. When I visited the museum in 2004, I was initially denied permission to view the room where the remains had been held, but officials relented a few days later. I thought that was a really important footnote to read. Let's see. They ultimately did return the remains, vigorously protested by whites, I believe in 2002. They did return the remains. But that pattern of negrophilia and disrespect of black life even after death, long-running pattern of the system of white supremacy, and I mean long-running 2002 that they finally shipped her remains back to the continent. Okay, let's see. On 179. This is talking about Joyce Heth, P.T. Barnum, and the origins of the circus. Hopefully people will keep this in mind. Anytime if a circus happens to come to town or if you go, what have you, you can share this information with others. If you go to the circus, I'm not a fan, so I don't participate in that sort of frolicking, where it says mortality was a revealing, even Freudian choice of words, because I think today's Freud's birthday, unless I'm mistaken. Choice of words because Heth's death was eagerly awaited, for only afterward could Barnum stage her public dissection. In fact, Barnum's bogus memoirs, he described her as a remarkably old Negro woman who was swindling my friend, her former owner, R.W. Lindsay, by her disgusting pertinacity to cling to life at his expense. That might even be a great passage that you could share because that's directly from him. Nothing like having it straight from the horse's mouth. I'm using that metaphor deliberately now. Great line. Just, again, the total contempt, and I mean trashiness with regard to black life. more valuable to me in death. People have talked about that in application to black artists once they've transitioned. Michael Jackson, Whitney Houston, more recently Prince, have talked about that. Same thing. I hope this nigger will hurry up and die so we can publicly butcher her and charge people. I think they said it was, 50 cents to come and watch her be publicly butchered. I think you can even compare this, if you want to relate it to Michael Brown, his corpse being laid out in the road. I think many of the lynching books that we've talked about recently, they've talked about this, leaving the body out to hang for days on end, this necrophilia, and just total disregard for black people, black bodies. This is great. We can come and watch them hack her up in the blood and save tokens from the body and just all of that. Just that is white culture. Undeniably, you see the remnants even today in things like The Walking Dead and what have you. Last thing I'll get in case I did have some other notes, but I think I'll stop early just to make sure folks have anything. I thought the passage, I'll get this in, just the passage where they talked about how to enforce their lies. I think even with P.T. Barnum, the lies, that's clearly on display here. I think that's been on display, maybe even one of the more important themes in this book, white people lying, whether it's Thomas Jefferson lying about experimenting on his black slaves and saying they were family members. That was from last week's section of the text. This week, P.T. Barnum and all the lies that he's telling about Joyce Heth while she's alive and after she's dead. Just lying. One of the constants in racism, white supremacy. But to support their fabrications and deception, going in and sewing horns on black people. The passage where she says anonymous wild men have sometimes been surgically altered to resemble animal-human hybrids, such as Calvin Byrd, who fled a circus and appeared at a Syracuse hospital asking to have his surgically implanted horns removed. There's a lot of documented evidence of this sort of thing, which again is just butchery. I cannot imagine. Just any aspect of this, but I cannot imagine them having any concern or empathy, anesthesia for Mr. Byrd to do all of this. Just the grotesqueries abound in reading a book like this. Anything else I want to make sure I get in? The circuses, again, anybody around the circus should check. You should have this information. Yeah, the rape that was on display a lot into. With regards to what the female caller mentioned about not thinking of Benjamin Rush as a racist because he was an abolitionist, I was reminded of The Half Has Never Been Told. I think in that book, even though it's written by a suspected racist, I think he did do a pretty solid job of explicitly stating that just because you were a quote-unquote abolitionist did not mean that you were a racist. It certainly didn't mean that you had any regard for black people as humans. It could have simply meant that you had a disagreement with how racism is practiced and that you just didn't think that we should have this style of racism. We should have something else. It certainly doesn't mean that you're in love with black people. I think he did do at least an adequate job of making that clear. I think we brought that point up some other times on the program. And in fact, I would encourage, I used last week, I was a little ahead of the curve. The introduction for last week's book study session, I used Vernelia Randall, where she talked about Benjamin Rush the first time she was a guest on the Cows back in August of 2009. She does a brilliant job of breaking this down and saying that you have to be very careful before you say, oh, this white person, just because they're taking a stance that superficially on the surface appears to be against racism. It sounds like they're advocating on our behalf because they might have ulterior motives about what it is that they're doing. You have to really investigate who this person is, what they're about, before you just, oh yeah, this person is great, they're advocating on our behalf. She did a brilliant job. She did it within the context of Benjamin Rush and saying specifically, this guy is a white supremacist, looking at exactly what she brought out in this week in the text, black people are lepers and all this other not racist nonsense, and saying, no, he absolutely is a racist, and I don't care if he gave some lip service to saying that he was against the enslavement of black people in this area of the world. So what? Many other racists did the same thing. And I can, just the listener wrote in relation to that point. He said, if you tell the female that commented on abolitionists not being racist, point to the show you did with Dr. Goldfield, who wrote the book America Aflame. I think he talked about the behavior of white abolitionists at the time. Dr. Goldfield wrote America Aflame. He was on the broadcast in 2011. And I think he also, as I said, I think we brought this point up many times. Abolitionist does not mean not racist. Same, I would say. White person, period. You should not ever be thinking not racist if this is an individual classified as white. I can stop there. We have about 3 minutes. I know Roz had additional points he wanted to get in. I'm not sure if anybody else did. Folks have anything? Oh, I think we have some callers who have not shared yet. Y'all have to pause. We had 2 people that called in from a block number. We're going to the audio segment in like 3 minutes, so you all have to go quickly if you have comments that you want to get in. The people that called in from a block number that we have not heard from?
No, I'm going to cede my time to the next caller. So.
Sorry. Do you want me to go first?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I'm going to be quick. I'm just going to say, as a person, just because a person is an abolitionist does not mean they're racist, because the abolitionists, what they really wanted was to get rid of all of us, black people, and send us to Africa, when in reality, most of us are natives of this country. You know, they have no right to do that. And just like I live in Kansas, and Kansas was always considered a free state, and that meant that they didn't want any black people in this state. You know, so that doesn't mean that they cared about black people. They just didn't want black people around. And that part about the leprosy, I always thought leprosy meant that you lose color. That's the part. When I read that part in the book, I didn't understand. Like, people that with leprosy, their skin turned brown. I saw a special on National Geographic one time of people that had leprosy, and they lost the coloring in their skin. So I didn't understand where that part came from. And that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Right on. Carmen, did you want to get anything in, like 2 minutes or so, or you want to wait? You can be the first person to comment when we get done with the second audio clip. Do you want to say anything briefly before we get to it? I guess I don't know if you muted your line. We're not hearing you. I don't know if that is you will.
You're so right. I did mute my line.
Oh, okay.
But I wanted to thank that other caller for what he said about white people never having to make any kind of compensation or recompense for anything they've ever done. So there is no reason to think that they have ever stopped any of these heinous practices. There's no reason. And that made me think about, the body parts they keep keeping and all of the body parts that are missing from our young people. I'm here in the South, and I mean, we have not even been able to integrate the cemeteries yet, no matter how hard we try. We can't even get a white funeral home to pick up a black person, it's just, they won't do it. And yet, all of these body parts are missing from black people. I just have to believe that it's all of the black funeral directors. I didn't realize how complicit they must be. They must be deeply complicit in this. That people would come back without body parts and the families not know this. But that was just something that came to me when he was talking about them keeping all of these body parts all the time for study or fun or curiosity or whatever they do. So, thank you.
Right on. We will get to the second audio segment. If folks have commentary they would like to share that you did not get in, if you could just make a note, jot it down. We should have ample time once the second audio segment concludes. We are still in Chapter 3. Harriet A. Washington, Medical Apartheid, Context of White Supremacy, audio segment number 2.
World's fairs were designed to present the exotic, to evoke wonder, and to hail scientific progress. And scientists at the 1904 St. Louis World's Fair attempted to entrance in a manner that was eccentric even for this celebration of the unusual. The fair's anthropology wing showcased hundreds of strange persons in the World Congress of Races who had been collected from around the world and were displayed in their natural habitats. Simulated villages and huts housed Igorots and Negritos from southeastern Asia, as well as Malayans, Sinhalese, Pygmies, and Native Americans. These represented the human spoils of Western forced expansion into Africa, Asia, and other parts of the Third World. This human zoo of colonialism presented Westerners with dark-skinned savages as trophies of conquest and objects of scientific wonder. These people were displayed in St. Louis for the same ultimate purpose that Columbus had imported entire Native American villages to Europe. Columbus wished to show Queen Isabella where her money had gone, and what peoples the Empire of Spain now encompassed. Curator W.J. McGee aimed for a panoply of evolution that was exhaustively scientific, from the highest to the lowest forms of man. Accordingly, the darkest blacks, from the lowest known culture, were contrasted to the dominant whites of man's highest culmination. The St. Louis Post-Dispatch proclaimed, "African pygmies for the World's Fair. Amazing dwarfs of the Congo Valley to be seen in St. Louis, some red, some black. They antedate the Negro in equatorial Africa. Fearless midgets who boldly attack elephants with tiny lances, bows, and arrows." Another group of strange persons was found in abundance amid the huts, adobes, and teepees: psychologists. For the World Congress of Races was also a huge testing site. Columbia University's Dr. R.S. Woodworth led researchers in administering a battery of psychometric and anthropometric examinations to 1,100 exotics. 4 pygmies were among the exhibited, and rudimentary intelligence tests were administered to help quantify how far below whites they fell on the intellectual scales. These exhibited test subjects must have had names, but only one name has survived: Otabenga. However, not every believer in a distinctive black physiology was a racist who wished to prove blacks innately and irrevocably inferior. Like African American scientists, some 18th and 19th century white physicians and statesmen worked to promulgate the belief that one could look different and yet not be inferior. So did abolitionists. Abolitionist and journalist Frederick Douglass proved a brilliant social analyst, as he held his own in this scientific arena, demonstrating the illogic and manipulation in religious arguments for black inferiority, while sidestepping the more reductionist and often apocryphal scientific details. For example, he slashed the Gordian knot of comparative physiognomy by objecting to how scientists loaded the dice in making comparative images of relatively unattractive black subjects and unusually attractive whites with perfect Grecian profiles. It is fashionable now in our land to exaggerate the differences between the Negro and the European. The phrenologist or naturalist will invariably present the highest type of the European and the lowest types of the Negro. If the very best type of the European is always presented, I insist that justice in all such works demands that the very best type of the Negro should be taken. The importance of this criticism may not be apparent to all. To the black man, it is very apparent. James McCune Smith, M.D., was another important critic. This brilliant African-American physician and statistical scientist was superbly equipped to refute the scientific racists on their own ground, and did so regularly. His 1837 lecture exposing the scientific fallacy of phrenology took on the ethnologists' essays and offered scathing criticisms of their logical sins in imputing character and intelligence from physiology. P.T. Barnum in Whiteface. Barnum, who had performed in blackface as a youth, capitalized on another important fad in skin color when he began to exhibit his encyclopedic collection of white Negroes. These were African Americans suffering from albinism, vitiligo, also called leukoderma, genetic mosaicism, and other medical conditions that whiten the skin. Such white Negroes were not unknown to Europeans, but in the mid-19th century, Americans facing a profound racial crisis suddenly found them fascinating. In 1846, Barnum hawked exhibits such as his twin Kaffirs, with bodies almost pure white, faces black as ebony, features perfectly human, noses, eyes, ears, etc., perfect miniatures of the Negro, covered with black woolly hair. These were albinos with artificially darkened faces and hair. Barnum also called them leucoethiopes, Greek for white Ethiopians, or leopard boys. Black albino women were displayed with exotic manufactured histories and names such as the Circassian Beauty. In August 1850, Barnum displayed a black man whose skin was gradually but perceptibly lightening, and who claimed to have discovered a weed that would gradually turn Negroes white. Barnum praised this discovery as the solution of the slavery problem, for the problem of slavery would disappear with their color. Other entrepreneurs displayed many white Negroes the public seemed never to tire of. The medical fascination with the white Negro reflected the belief of some scientists who, pointing to the straight hair and finer features of property-owning free blacks and of enslaved house servants, proposed that African Americans were turning white as a response to the civilizing influences of Western European cultures. Of course, African Americans were acquiring European features the natural way, but many whites maintained a high level of denial about the degree of black-white mating. On a superficial level, the spectacle of a black person turning white was simply a freakish reversal of nature, on the level of a bearded lady or a hermaphrodite. On another, deeper level, he posed an implicit threat to civilization, because white skin was held to denote evolutionary advantage during this period, when most scientists insisted that whites were the superior humans, or perhaps even the only true humans. If a Negro could turn white, what would become of the special evolutionary status that whites enjoyed? If a Negro's black skin could be shed so simply, what, if anything, did it mean to be a Negro? The justification for slavery and unequal treatment of all kinds evaporated with skin color. As Charles D. Martin muses in his provocative book, The White African American Body, the white Negro was not only a freak, but a troubling one, even if his viewers could not articulate why. Interestingly, the circus circulars, carnival barkers, and even medical scientists who studied white Negroes tended to observe that, along with their fading skin color, they lost the flattened nose, broader lips, and woolly hair that marked the Africans. This is a perplexing claim, because the medical disorders that leach skin, and sometimes hair color, do not change the features. While one cannot be sure what motivated these extraordinary claims, the results of this irrational belief are clear. The purported loss of all external manifestations of race fuel the argument that to discover what constituted a Negro, it is necessary to go deeper, under the skin, to dissect. The collective delusion that white Negroes were acquiring European facial features helped drive an impetus for the eventual surgical dissection of blacks to find the internal physiological markers and meaning of blackness. Not only did Barnum's white Negroes intrigue the public, but their exhibition also coincided with a fad in medicine. In every major city and in scores of smaller towns, physicians as well as gawkers hungrily throng these exhibits. White Negroes posed a challenge to physicians who strove to understand the medical reason for and the medical import of this transformation. Physicians knew of albinism, a set of hereditary conditions that causes people to be born without the melanin that gives color to skin, hair, and the pupils of the eye. They had encountered a few blacks born with genetic mosaicism, which causes permanently mottled skin, with both white and black patches. Medical descriptions of black hermaphrodites and leopard boys appear in the literature at least as early as 1754, and Charles Darwin had once given a photograph of such a leopard boy to the Museum of the Royal College of Surgeons. When a black person exhibited mosaicism or albinism, physicians wrote him up in medical journals, displayed him in hospitals, and sometimes took him on the road, displaying him for money. However, doctors did not understand that most people who were born black but whose skin was gradually turning white suffered from vitiligo, a medical condition in which the skin's melanin-bearing cells, or melanocytes, gradually lose their color for a variety of reasons. This medical disorder affects both blacks and whites, but the darker skins of African Americans make vitiligo a very dramatic condition, whereas in whites it can be nearly imperceptible. Of course, scientists also knew that matings between blacks and whites could produce offspring who were very light-skinned or who appeared white. Conventional wisdom denied that white men were impregnating the black women they owned, but the public display of a white child born of a black woman immediately evoked the spectral white father lurking in the background. Miscegenation is a misnomer for the matings between blacks and whites, because the word, from the Latin miscere, to mix, and genus, race, refers to matings between two separate races, rather than the intraspecies mating that takes place between whites and blacks in interracial relationships. However, such mating was denied by physicians and carnival barkers as the genesis of white Negroes. Whatever their genesis, most scientists took a dim view of the white Negro. They perceived in him or her a variety of challenges to the primacy, status, and security of the white race, and, with it, to nascent American scientific culture. This is because the scientific culture of the 19th century still relied upon taxonomy or categorization. Movement within taxonomies such as Carl Linnaeus's celebrated evolutionary scheme was possible, but such transitions had to be logical, predicted by and explainable by medical theory. It would not do to have categories, schemes, and classifications of peoples called into question by such unpredicted changes as Negroes who, inexplicably and illogically, insisted upon turning white. They could not be explained by theory, so they contradicted and threatened the classification scheme, and therefore the social order. Some men of science, notably Stanhope Smith, rightly deduced that intermarriage was causing the Europeanizing of black features, and that eventually skin color distinctions could disappear if black-white unions were allowed to proceed unchecked. However, most scientists of the period believed that race was deeper than skin color, and that a white Negro was still a Negro. The birth of white children from black mothers also reminded whites that untold numbers of Negroes were passing for white, a social problem whispered of in polite society and broadly lampooned in the pages of popular newspapers and political circulars. Foreign visitors to the South, who often harbored anti-slavery sentiments, remarked openly upon the difficulty of discerning the race of people whom they met. When the Duc de la Rochefoucauld-Liancourt visited Thomas Jefferson at Monticello, he pointedly observed that his host owned many mongrel Negroes who, neither in point of color nor features, shewed the least trace of their original descent. Jefferson, statesmen and scientists, found white Negroes very disturbing. When he wrote about them at some length in his 1783 Notes on the State of Virginia, he took pains to banish the specter of miscegenation by recounting genealogies demonstrating that the parents of these anomalies were all unquestionably black. Because DNA evidence has lent credibility to claims that he fathered children with his enslaved mistress, Sally Hemings, there may have been personal motives for Jefferson's discomfort. Many scientists also speculated, uncomfortably, that Negroes who were born white would gain the capability to pass ad infinitum by bestowing their acquired white skins on their progeny. Perhaps this is why Jefferson undertook a survey to reassure himself that white Negroes were not proliferating. Such insecurities may also explain a peculiar corrective measure introduced in 1854 by a Dr. Lylebergs of Mississippi. He announced that his medical research had produced a tincture that would make a white man black, and would make his children black as well. Lylebergs supplemented this discovery with a wash that would transform a white's hair into Negro wool. The fear that white Negroes would usurp the favored evolutionary positions of whites certainly abetted the belief, promulgated by scientific racists such as Josiah Nott, that mulattoes were too frail, feeble, and infertile to reproduce their own kind for many generations. In fact, the term mulatto comes from the Spanish word for mule, a sterile cross between a horse and a donkey. Jefferson and other scientists who were desperately seeking distinctions between whites and white Negroes also differentiated between the disagreeable pallor of white Negroes and the healthily ruddy skins of true whites. Italian scientist Cesare Lombroso took pains to observe that authentically white skin was always touched with red, and that the Negro's inability to blush was seen as a distinctly racial characteristic that revealed a person's savage African race by revealing his inherent shamelessness. Jefferson's quest to distinguish the Negro did not stop at the surface. He insisted that blackness resided not in the superficial changeable skin of the Negro, but rather that it was a permanent badge of inferiority that resided deeper within the body. Whether the black of the Negro reside, in the reticular membranes between the skin and the scar skin itself, whether it proceeds from the color of the blood, the color of the bile, or from that of some other secretion, the difference is fixed in nature. Jefferson and his fellow scientific racists did not know what blackness was, and they did not know where it was. They only knew that it simply had to be there, permanently, somewhere. Many scientists of the era, like their forebears, devoted themselves to pursuing the elusive inner markers of blackness. Dr. J. H. Gwenebold compiled a list of 47 physical traits other than skin color that distinguished blacks. Josiah Nott made a list of 25, from black areas of the Negro brain to darkened blood and internal organs to the pendulous breasts of African women. Every scientist had his pet method for revealing a Negro. Cartwright and other early scientific racists had insisted all black racial attributes, visible and invisible, had one meaning. These differences indelibly marked the Negro as the inferior, submissive knee-bender, and son of Ham of the Bible. A change in skin color could not change this. Scientists had passed over the threshold of anatomical dissection as the popular event that Joyce Heth's autopsy had portended. Jefferson insisted that scientists seeking the seat of the Negro's blackness should resort to the anatomical knife, to optical glasses, to analysis by fire or by solvents. Late 19th century scientists had grown dissatisfied with biblical injunctions and impatient. Skin color had become a treacherous signal, and whites were faced with an atmosphere of escalating social urgency. Ridiculed as barbarians by their former colonizer, England, and by most of Europe as well, Americans felt they could ill afford to be characterized as a nation of mongrels and mere pretenders to white status. Black skin could no longer consistently and reliably designate a Negro, so it was critically important to find other means of detection. Physician scientists felt long-delayed medical winds of change traversing the Atlantic that had made anatomical investigation with human bodies the gold standard of medical research. Driven by social changes such as the imminent failure of chattel slavery and the emergence of white Negroes, scientists were eager to delve more deeply under the skin of African Americans. They wished to discover clues to race that were more than skin deep, to invade the skin, to peel away the musculature, to unfurl the intestines, and to calibrate the bones. In this way, they felt, they could understand the nature of race and regain control over the black bodies that were slipping from their intellectual and literal grasp. Chapter 4. The Surgical Theater. Black Bodies in the Antebellum Clinic. Such free persons of color as may not be able to pay for medical advice should call at the hospital. The object of the faculty is to collect as many interesting cases as possible for the benefit and instruction of their pupils. Medical College of South Carolina advertisement in the Charleston Courier, November 16, 1837. Sam, a 42-year-old laborer on a plantation in rural Alabama, had become exhausted by pain and fear. For years, an incessant racking pain in his jaw had kept him distracted days and awake nights, miserable and dejected. When his owner learned of Sam's pain around 1838, he decided that Sam must have syphilis and applied a homemade concoction, whose only effect was to produce a painful boil on Sam's gums. Now Sam also found it difficult to eat. He should have been a strong, productive worker in the prime of his earning power, but Sam was finding it harder and harder to work, even in the face of cajoling and threats. By 1845, he had become worthless in the fields, and in desperation, his owner summoned a physician, who determined that Sam was suffering not from syphilis, but from osteosarcoma, a cancer of his lower jawbone. The doctor turned to a surgical colleague, Dr. Marion J. Sims, who declared to Sam's owner that only an operation carried hope of a cure. But Sam vehemently and repeatedly refused, protesting that it would hurt too bad. Today, refusing to undergo an operation for a treatable cancer is a tragic mistake, because surgery is the most curative mode of therapy for cancer. Today, anesthetics, antiseptics, and antibiotics banish or at least mitigate the twin nightmares of surgical pain and infection. However, Sam's cancer predated the common use of effective anesthesia and of sterile technique. Purgatorial pain was certain, and a fatal infection all too likely. What's more, the disfiguring surgery might have been futile, because only superficial, visible cancers were discovered during this era. Not until Wilhelm Röntgen discovered X-rays in 1895 could physicians view the body's interior without invasive surgery. No imaging techniques allowed doctors to identify an internal cancer, and it could have spread internally through the long years when Sam was being erroneously treated for syphilis. Sam's version of events is not recorded, so we don't know whether more than a fear of pain caused him to balk at surgery. But we do know that Sam might by this time have acquired a low opinion of Western medicine's ability to help him, thanks to the original misdiagnosis and iatrogenic injury. If Sam had gotten wind of Sims's dismal surgical statistics, his famed fondness for forced experimentation on captive patients, or of his penchant for taking shoemakers' tools to black infants' skulls, Sam's opinion of Sims's skill would have sunk low indeed. But he would not have dared to openly voice doubts about Sims's abilities, so refusing treatment because of the pain may have been a canny dodge. However, Sam was enslaved, so the decision was left not to him but to his owner, who was eager to return his slave to profitable work. Sam was sent to Montgomery despite his loud and constant protests. Sims, for his part, stonily declared himself determined not to be foiled in the attempt to operate. Sims had decided not only to operate upon Sam, but also to perform the surgery in a teaching clinic for a medical audience of students and potential protégés. He hoped to immortalize the operation in a medical publication, and no mere slave would frustrate this bid for medical glory. But when the two adversaries met, Sims was all smiles. He kindly inquired into the slave's health and graciously invited Sam to have a seat. The barber's chair into which Sam had been welcomed had been surreptitiously fitted with wooden planks, and as soon as Sam was seated, 5 young physicians bounded forward to restrain him with straps about his thighs, knees, ankles, abdomen, chest, shoulders, arms, wrists, elbows, and head. Sam, Sims noted, appeared to be very much alarmed. While he was being immobilized, 10 medical students and 15 interested others filed in to watch as Sims operated for 40 minutes to remove a large section of Sam's lower jawbone, sans anesthesia. When he finished, the surgeon noted with satisfaction that his surgical innovation had proved its practicality, whether the patient is willing or not. The editors of the New Orleans Medical and Surgical Journal enthused that they were pleased to record this highly creditable achievement of a Southern surgeon. After he recuperated, Sam apparently lost no time in escaping into rural Alabama again, certainly with a redoubled aversion to Western medicine. There is no evidence that Sims ever saw Sam again, but his medical report took this parting shot. Sam's mouth is always open in a wide grin.
Woo! That is where we will pick up at next week. The subheading, Staging Disease Treatment Under the Microscope. That's next week, Chapter 4, Context of White Supremacy. Folks have commentary that they would like to share. Feel free to dial in. If you had comments that you did not get to share during the first section, you should do so now. If you did not get a chance to speak during the first section, you should certainly get your hand up now. The number again, 641-715-3640. The code 564-943 pound. Press star 6 if you would like to participate. Everyone who dialed in with a hand up should be with us. There's too many folks for me to name. If you dialed in with a hand up, you should be with us. Feel free to chime in. I think all the people that were here commented last time, so I don't think it's anybody that we totally missed. So if you have comments you would like to share, feel free to chime in.
Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
All right. The piece I wanted to speak about from the last section, I just felt it needed to be read just to emphasize something that you speak about on this program quite often. It's on page 89. I soon got Joyce into training, and from a devil of a termagant, converted into a most docile creature as willing to do my bidding as the slave of the lamp was to obey Aladdin. I discovered her weak point, whiskey. Her old master, of course, would indulge an old bedridden creature in no such luxury, and for a drop of it, I found I could mold her to anything. This speaks again to sobriety would be best, staying away from white people, and just their use of liquor in facilitating their sophisticated terrorism of black people. So I just felt it needed to be read to emphasize that point because it just speaks volumes. Now to get to the section that we just read, this is just really awesome. On page 94, Dr. Washington writes, James McCune Smith, MD, was another important critic. This brilliant African-American physician and statistical scientist was superbly equipped to refute the scientific racists on their own ground and did so regularly. His 1837 lecture exposing the scientific fallacy of phrenology took on the ethnologists' essays and offered scathing criticisms of their logical sins and imputing their character and intelligence from physiology. It just wonderful black self-respect. That's an ancestor that will go on my ancestral altar. Love that, and it just really touched me just to see this this brother putting it down like that. And I'm glad to hear about that. Also, on the following page, she writes, August 1850, Barnum displayed a black man whose skin was gradually but perceptibly lightening, and who claimed to have discovered a weed that would gradually turn Negroes white. Barnum praised his discovery as a solution of slavery problem. The slavery with this color. Other entrepreneurs displayed many Negroes in public, seemed to never tire of. This just speaks to white people's fascination with all things white. It also speaks to the fact that something that you've always said, I feel it's like a double entendre. Essentially, they're saying that we will never stop practicing racism unless you become a white person, which none of us can ever do, not even an albino. So to me, this just speaks to the fact that they would never stop practicing racism. And the black male who was speaking previously in reference to the behavior of white people, I think the books you were talking about was Michael Bradley, The Iceman Inheritance, and Chosen People of the Caucasus, if I'm not mistaken. Also, oh, this was really telling. On page 98, it says, fear that white Negroes would usurp the favored evolutionary position of whites certainly abetted the belief promulgated by scientific racists such as Josiah Nott that mulattoes were too frail, feeble, and infertile to reproduce their own kind for many generations. In fact, the term mulatto comes from the Spanish word for mule, a sterile crossbreed between a horse and a donkey. Wow, I never knew that, and I just found that to be like fascinating. That they would equate the mixture of a white person with a black person to a mule, which is actually sterile. So I just find that to be a very Welsing-esque moment just for what it's speaking about. Oh, I found this really interesting. At the bottom of the page, they say Jefferson's quest to distinguish the Negro did not stop at the surface. He insisted that blackness resided not in the superficial, changeable skin of the Negro, but rather that it was a permanent badge of inferiority that resided deeper within the body. Whether the black of the Negro resided thick in the reticular membranes between the skin and the scarf skin itself, whether it proceeds from the color of the blood, the color of the bile, or from that of some other secretion, the difference is fixed in nature. Jefferson and his fellow scientific racists did not know what blackness was. They did not know where it was. They only knew that it simply had to be there permanently somewhere. This is a serious Welsing moment. They were, in my opinion, they were searching for the essence of what it means to be an African. And, I mean, they took these grotesque approaches to finding that information out through their racism, white supremacy, but it just speaks to their deep obsession with their lack of color and our immense abundance of color. And the fact that they would think that our skin color would come from color of the blood and bile and all this other nonsense just speaks to the stupidity of white people. Just, I mean, across the board, they're smart and dumb at the same time. And the only thing what they're most smart about is practicing racism and white supremacy. And about quite a bit of other things, they're quite stupid. And this just speaks volumes to that. And lastly, I just wanted to say that last part that we got to, where you ended at, was just really, really hard to take in. And I'll end it there. But I'll just say that was really hard to listen to. Thank you.
Other folks have comments that they would like to share. Feel free. Not wait until the last minute. Go ahead and get our hands up if you have comments you would like to share, or unmute. Not wait until the last minute today.
Yes, may I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Okay, couple of things from the last reading that I'd like to bring up. On page 95, in August 1850, Barnum displayed a black man whose skin was gradually but perceptibly lightening, and who claimed to have discovered a weed that would gradually turn Negroes to white. I thought about Dr. Welsing at that time when she said that if she had 3 pills, that she could be rich, and one would turn a black person white, and the other one would change his hair, and I forgot what the third pill would do. But, as people of color, we have been conditioned, and so we're taught through the conditioning that white is perfect and is desirable, and so we imitate whites. And maybe not so much now, but there was a perception that a person of black complexion, desired to be white, which, is, absurd, really. But there's also one other thing that I like to bring up about Sam, the slave. He was only 42 years old, but he had developed cancer in his lower jaw. And so, like I said, these victims, their versions were not recorded. So Sam's version was not recorded, but they do know that he did not want the operation and that he complained about it. They forced him into a chair, strapped him in, and Sims, it says on 104, Sims, for his part, sternly declared himself determined not to be foiled in the attempt to operate. Sims had decided not only to operate upon Sam, but also to perform the surgery in a teaching clinic for a medical audience of students and potential proteges. He hoped to immortalize the operation in a medical publication, and no mere slave would frustrate his bid for medical glory. It just goes to show you what it means to be white. There was no concern of Sam's health. He was just thinking about his own glory. And then I remember Mr. Fuller saying these supremacists have a sense of humor. It's like the Hordersby spoke at Oda Benga's memorial, where he turned it into something semi-comical, and a lot of mistruths, that backed his racist agenda. Where Sims did the same thing after he had removed Sam's jaw. At the end of the reading, it said, after he recuperated, Sam apparently lost no time in escaping into rural Alabama again, certainly with a redoubled aversion to Western medicine. There is no evidence that Sims ever saw Sam again, but his medical report took this parting shot. Sam's mouth is always open in a wide grin. It just shows the sick humor that these racists have, and that they know what they're doing. They're amused by it. They're entertained by the suffering and the mistreatment of black people. And the sooner we know that, the better we'll be able to deal with living in a racist nation like America. I'll mute my line. Thanks for taking the call, Gus.
Yes, sir. Other folks who have not spoken during the second session here, if you have comments you want to share, feel free.
Can you hear? I'm sorry.
I can hear you, Thomas.
Mary Hurt?
Yes, ma'am. Caller in Michigan.
Good evening, Gus, and to the callers and listeners. Well, I just wanted to chime in. This book is incredibly hard to read for me. It's just really heartbreaking and distressing to see, once again, the mistreatment of black people. And this is really making my stomach hurt as I turn each page. It's very necessary for me and for us to know this truth. And I'm just really just thankful for this, because I was in the bookstore and I just look at different book titles, and I know how I would hesitate to or overlook a book like this under, other circumstances. But I have, just committed to at least reading the books that are on this program, and it has shed a lot of light for me, just to know how white people are. I agree that all white people are racist. That's just my thoughts, my conclusion until proven otherwise. And this book, I'm just having I'm listening to the reading, I'm reading, and I'm just having personally, just difficulty just accepting just this. Because I was talking to, I have a youth program. I was talking to some of the youth in my program over this past week, and they are really confused just at racism in 2016, so to speak. And so this book is just, like all the other ones, is just proving more and more how confused Black people are. And even, like this is just the medical field, so it's just giving me the creeps. And I'm just being more mindful of my health and the health of my family and loved ones, because just to hear the treatment and just the experimentation of we're just their play, we're their game right now, and it's just heartbreaking. So I'm taking this in. And I'm just really appreciative of the platform, like I said, because I know that I'm really sensitive when it comes to stuff like this. And it's just, my emotions are kind of like, I'm feeling all kind of emotions when I'm reading this. And, but I know it's necessary. So it's really just exposing a lot for me, whereas I would have not necessarily picked this book under any other circumstance. So I'll mute my line.
For sure. Sort of thing, I guess if you have to make a decision about organ donating, or if you're contacted by a hospital where they want you to come in for a cert, this is the sort of thing that weighs in for making a decision, in my opinion. Thomas in New York, did you? Oh, I'm sorry.
Before Thomas comments, I definitely wanted to say, this book definitely was timely, because I was contacted to donate bone marrow, and it was really interesting because I don't know how they got my information, and they were harassing me, so to speak, to donate. And I did email you, Gus, so you know the story behind this, but I did let them know that I'm not interested. I specifically wanted to know if it was a non-white person that I would be donating to, and they refused to answer that. But after reading this and after just understanding the psyche behind these so-called doctors and scientists, I'm so glad that I, just chose not to participate. And I told them to remove my name and please don't ever contact me again. This is so, yeah.
For sure. Knowledge is power. Thomas in New York, you were going to comment?
Yes, sir. This is a tough one to read. I'm glad we did the Henrietta Lacks book, because it sort of was conditioning. I think I could take it all now. Everyone touched on great points. One point I wanted to make was, I grew up on a block with an albino kid, and he had two brothers who were not albino, and we would often pick on him as a kid. We would call him Snow White or other names, and he would chase us. And my mother would always say, "That's not nice. Your kids are gonna come out like that. You shouldn't make fun of people like that." But it didn't hit me until one day. We were all in the streets playing street football. I come from the hood. We played street football and crate basketball. And a cop car came past. And it just so happened we had one white family on our whole street, and they owned like 3 cars. So regardless of where you play football, you were around their cars. So they called the cops, so we would have to stop playing. And his mother and his grandmother happened to be outside waiting for the cops to come, because it was already an altercation that we wasn't moving. And the cops rolled past, and they looked at us, and they kept going, and they got on the loudspeaker and said, a bunch of Cokes and 1 can of Sprite. And his mother ran off the porch after the cop car, and they were just laughing, riding down the street. And I'll never forget that day, and I never called him any names after that, because it was like, wow. So what I like to say is the book is excellent so far. Seems like they're doing a lot of, I think these doctors in this era is doing a lot of lying. I think that they're either they're lying or they're in denial. And I don't think white people are in denial. I think that they understand there's a difference. They understand that it's a genetic inferiority, not inferiority, and they've taken a conscious effort to switch things around in their history, the way they write it, so they'll always be perceived the way they want it to be. But it's obvious, everything they're saying. If you read the whole, everything that we read, it's obvious that the black people are dominant. And I'll mute my line.
For sure. Folks that we haven't heard from, second session, do y'all have comments that you wanted to share? Feel free. I don't know if the other people that are with us, if you just didn't have anything that you wanted to share, nothing jumped out at you during the second session, that's fine. But folks that we have not heard from second session, anything you all want to get in?
Hey, Gus, can I answer that question from earlier very quickly?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I just wanted to say everyone's critique was right on point. All whites are racist. That's what it means to be white, is you have to be a racist. And they play that game, the abolitionists versus the non-abolitionists, the same way they play the game, the liberals versus the conservatives today. It's the same thing. They're both racist. They just have two different ways of going about practicing it. One's a little bit better for us, so we go with that one. But either way, we're still going to be at the bottom at the end. And they're very comfortable with that. And I'll mute my line.
For sure. Caller at 3637, last four digits, 3637. Did you have commentary you wanted to get in?
Hello, may I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Hello, all the listeners and Gus and everyone. Is this the same person that read the Half Has Never Been Told?
I would have to go back and look. Yeah, I'd have to go back and look. I can't even venture a guess. I read the person's name who wrote this or who is narrating this book last week. Let me go check and see who did the Half Has Never Been Told.
Sounds like him. But for this one, I actually just tuned in. I was at a band concert, but I still had cows on muted, and I had it real low, so I was going in and out. And I think I heard some about some horns being on someone and the Barnum and Bailey circus people. So I'm going to have to go and listen to it again. But I usually get caught up with them on Fridays at work, and I heard the last session that Karma had a good one about holding your hand or wherever you got burnt, holding that area under real cold water to prevent blisters. And I thought that was great. And I think that's a great idea. If anybody has any home remedies that we can do at home, because this is tragic. This is horrible. I mean, we're basically, boxed in under bad war conditions to where, I mean, I guess you just got to have at least one doctor in the family, because going out and getting treated by white people you're not getting treated. You're not getting treated. And like I said, I really didn't hear much from this week's reading, but just quickly about last week's reading where they were trying to protect the pregnant women's stomach while they were beating them, how they dug the holes out for their stomachs couldn't fit in. Repulsive. But Toni Morrison wrote about that in one of her books, Beloved. I was just going over that book this week, and I just wanted to bring that up. Not to get on another book, but I was just bringing it up. And I'm like the other callers. It's horrible to listen to. It's right up there with, the Half Has Never Been Told. It's gut-wrenching. It's sorrowful. It's painful to listen to, but it is necessary. And problem is white people. And I can't really mute my line, but that's all I had. Thank you so much for letting me share.
Yes, ma'am, for sure. And it is excellent ear. It is the same narrator as The Half Has Never Been Told, Ron Butler, non-white male. I read both. I mentioned Ron Butler's name last week and asking people if they had any either problems or observations, thoughts around male author reading a book written by a female. I wasn't quite sure if it was a white person or a non-white person at first, but now that I've seen a photograph, he's clearly not a white person to me, at least. But nobody said anything when I brought it up last week. So, quick observations that I had from this week on the abolitionist piece. Since America Aflame was mentioned, we had the author David Goldfield on the program back in 2011. You can go back in the archives to check that out if you are so interested. Where he talks a lot about quote-unquote abolitionists, just to make the point that being an abolitionist does not mean that you are not racist. And he has specific points where he's mentioning some of these people. Horace Greeley, this is a white guy who was in the North at the time, who was a quote-unquote abolitionist. So then after the Civil War ends and all that jazz, he lets things be known what his real thoughts are. So this is David Goldfield. He writes that, talking about Greeley, this former abolitionist confessed, "I was in the days of slavery an enemy of slavery. That might have been a mistake." Greeley mimicked the white Southerners' indictment of the freedmen, declaring, "Had blacks saved the money they have since 1865 spent in drink, tobacco, balls, gambling, and other dissipations, they might have bought therewith at least 10 million acres of soil in their respective states." Greeley made no mention of statutes that prohibited land sales to blacks or of the opprobrium faced by whites who rented land to black families. Very important piece, and there are many more. He talks about Harriet Beecher Stowe and how openly, explicitly racist she was after the Civil War. This is the woman who's lauded for writing Uncle Tom's Cabin, and oh, what a great book, one of the greatest books, they say, in the history of American literature, and helped push us towards the Civil War and allegedly freeing black people. That she openly espoused her contempt for black people after the Civil War. That's there in her book as well. Back to the book that we're talking about, Medical Apartheid. Okay, back to Medical Apartheid. Some of the notes that I took on the second segment of the book. Wow, that is really aggravating here. It's not letting me... Alrighty. I was getting a little bit of background noise. Okay. The second segment of the reading that we did, again, I think you all touched on a lot of good things. She had another section, I touched on this last time, where we're not using the most accurate terms to describe what this is, where she says, of course, African Americans were acquiring European features the natural way, but many whites maintained a high level of denial about the degree of black-white mating. This is rape, the American slave coast. We had the sublets on earlier this year. We talked about that in many books, many programs. We've talked about this, but just in my view, and this could even be an editing aspect. I don't know the folk, whomever. I would assume some white people had a hand in editing this book, and I would even say you can relate this to what she said about Benjamin Rush, because it's not the only white person that she has mentioned in this book where she cuts them some slack. If folks remember, I think the very first segment from 2 weeks ago where she's talking about this white doctor, this white physician that she knew, when she started going through the records and saw some of the paperwork from where he had worked on a black patient from before, and just the contempt that he had, Negro this and blah, 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 and whatever, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that, Bill is a racist. Like, I know him, and he's such a nice person. It seems like that is a recurring problem. It certainly could be her own difficulties with being honest about what it means to be white. It could be editing. because I think she said that she ran into problems where white people were finding out that she was going to publish this book and they didn't want her to do it, and told her so explicitly. She includes an anecdote about that in the first section that we did. It could be a combination of both, but that does seem to be a pattern, even relating to not describing rape most accurately in the text. It seems to be a reoccurring pattern. I guess that's something that we'll keep an eye on as we continue with the text. Let's see, moving. The whole spectacle of all of this, I think, is significant as well, where these butchering of black people, or the display of black people, a lot that was discussed in the previous section with Adabinga and Joyce Heth and Sarki Bartman and many other black people, the black male Mr. Bird, where they surgically butchered him and put horns on him to make him appear to be some sort of monster, beast, monstrosity. This reminds me very much of the book that we covered last week, Lynching as Spectacle, the significance of not just abusing a black person, but doing them in a manner where hordes of whites, I even forgot the number, but the thousands of people, tens of thousands, I think they said, that came to view Adabinga and Joyce Heth and all of these people to do this in a manner where large numbers of white people can come and observe the significance of that, the projection of, talk about white people not being able to be ignorant about racism. You're learning that right there when you're coming and seeing Adabinga in a cage, or any of these other examples that she's covered. That right there is getting racism 101, what you're supposed to think about black people, how we're supposed to treat them, what they're good for. You're getting all of that right there. And you have photographs. They have photographs to this day of all of these people, and not to mention the new images and what have you that they're projecting on a regular basis. But just that right there conveys a lot about, you cannot be a white person and be ignorant about racism, white supremacy, and the way that you are supposed to treat, regard, think about niggers. That's just not acceptable, and I think these are numerous examples, just being so public. Even the anecdote that she ended the audio segment this week with the surgery of Sam, Dr. J. Marion Sims. I'm not just going to do this in a private office, the way, the type of regard, respect that you would have for a white patient. No. I'm going to make this a public spectacle where we mutilate Sam against his wishes, where he doesn't want this done, and without anesthesia, in front of a whole room of other whites, where they can write about this and gawk at this black person being butchered by some, brute under the guise of a physician or a scientist, Dr. J. Marion Sims, who, again, just to emphasize, this is the heir to Dylan Storm Roof in South Carolina. This is the same sort of thinking about how blacks are to be treated. Butchering, mutilating, killing black people. They didn't take down Dr. J. Marion Sims' statue in South Carolina or Alabama or New York after the massacre in Charleston. They took down the flag, but they left all the other accoutrement of white supremacy. They're up and sterling, polished as we roll, including Ben Tillman. The abusing black people as fun, I think we've got a lot of that in this week's segment of the book. Them abusing, again, whether it's Adabinga or the joke that he makes, Dr. J. Marion Sim makes about Sam at the end of this. Practicing racism is supposed to be fun. I can, again, quote Mr. Nero, white people kill for fun. Killing specifically black people, it is a riot. Not what could be more humorous, enjoyable, more comedy than mutilating, killing black people. I think a lot of that has been on display with this week's section of the book, which I suspect probably adds to some of the discomfort and just the horror of reading about all this. But it doesn't seem like there's any compunction, any second thought about all this. It seems like it's done with a smile. It's done with a joke. I think even during the first audio segment, she included this white male, Haraday, I think is his name. I might be mispronouncing it, but where he writes, I guess it's supposed to be like an obituary about Adabinga after he's committed suicide with all the barbarism that he has experienced from whites and just can't take it anymore. Talk about black mental health. And this is a joke. He's writing, having fun. Oh, I did meant to mention, you can read that if you are so interested. What was written about Adabinga. You can read that. It's online. I have the links to what Mr. Werner wrote about Adabinga, as well as this other racist Hornaday. You can read both of the reports that they authored. They are online if folks want to check those out. I can share. I can just give you a quick snippet where it says, although Dr. Hornaday insisted that he was merely offering the intriguing exhibit for the public's edification, he wrote, apparently saw no difference between a wild beast and the little black man, and for the first time in any American zoo, a human being was displayed in a cage. Bingo was given cage mates to keep him company in his captivity, a parrot and an orangutan named Dohong. And it just goes on from there. But yeah, I mean, you can read just the amusement, the enjoyment that they get out of this classic. And I guess the last thing I'll get in with regards, I think Karma, she made the comment about perhaps black people being implicated in the harvesting of organs of black people once they have died. That is going to come up in this book later on. I guess two-pronged. What's done with black corpses after they are dead. Some of that you got with Joyce Hess, but that's going to come up again as the book goes on. And black people's involvement in this process of medical butchering. And if folks remember the audio segment that I began the first book study session on medical apartheid with, Dr. Harriet Washington addresses that specifically. And she talks about the Tuskegee syphilis experiment where people get on Dr. Nurse Rivers. We talked about that explicitly as well, where people get on her. This is a black female and saying, you know, how could she do this? What a traitor to her race and blah, 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 and going all then she's evil and da-da-da-da. And she really emphasizes how that seems to be a pattern where black people who are involved knowingly or unknowingly in this medical white terrorism, how they end up getting a lot of focus and attention when they are on the lowest rung in terms of knowing what's happening, having the power to do anything about this, where the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, people can name Nurse Rivers consistently. She asked a room full of people doing a lecture, can you name one white person who was involved? They could not name one white person. And she pointed that out as a major problem, how we should not be focusing on black people and being able to name them and call them out even if they are complicit, and that's incorrect, where the people who are most to blame, whites, remain anonymous, unknown, unindicted. And I think that is a hugely important lesson to carry forward. But both of those topics that she mentioned, they are going to come up in the book. Just got to keep rolling. We'll be on this for, I believe, 2 months. We have quite a few more sessions to go, more horrors in store. With that, we will wrap. We'll be here next Friday, segment number 4. We are in chapter 4. Medical Apartheid, great reading. If you have questions, I know folks listen to the archives. If you want to include something, you can drop an email and we can read it for the next week. Some people have already done that. I will include as we go. I was going to make one of the comments that folks wrote in the introduction for today's program, but just decided I'll save it for next week. If you have questions, comments, gripes, feel free to drop an email untiljustice@gmail.com. untiljustice@gmail.com. We'll be here tomorrow, obviously, compensatory call-in, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. Looking forward to hearing folks' observations, comments from what they've seen over the past 7 days, workplace racism especially. Invest if you think the program is constructive, racism-notes.blogspot.com, racism-notes.blogspot.com. PayPal button is in the top right corner. If you're not into PayPal, drop me an email. We'll get you a physical mailing address. I will say again, got mentioned twice, Mr. Demerford and Roz, sobriety would be best under conditions of white terrorism. Sobriety would be best under conditions of white terrorism. Certainly, whites have many, many examples, exploited and further terrorized us by having us inebriated, intoxicated, dumping all of their chemicals, narcotics, alcohol included on us, so we're not thinking clearly. That is one of the best things that we can do. Say we're going to put all of that down until this problem has been solved permanently. Certainly, if you are going to be out and about, you do not want to be under the influence. If you are a driver, passenger, I would even say a pedestrian, you never know when it's going to be Daniel Pantaleo, Daniel Holtzclaw, Darren Wilson, any of these other race soldiers, Timothy Loman, when that will be the person that's pulling you over or demanding that you stop and show them some identification and give an explanation about your where are you going, what's your destination, what are you doing, and you cannot respond effectively, efficiently with the best decisions under these conditions of terrorism, man, it can be bad really, really quick, and you're making their job very, very easy if you are intoxicated to take your life or abuse you and anybody that you might be responsible for. So just keep that in mind. If you're going to be in a vehicle, buckle up. Let's do everything that we can to minimize contact with race soldiers. That being said, Creator, we ask that you help us remain patient with other black people, victims of white supremacy. We ask that you help us remain patient with ourselves. Remind us to demonstrate the highest levels of black self-respect at all times, in all places, each and every time we are in contact with another black person. It has been time. Replace white supremacy with justice as soon as possible. Cal signing out. Thanks all for tuning in.
Nigga, you so brainwashed. I'm a victim, brother. Problem. You're a victim. I'm a victim of 400 years of conditioning. Shut up. The man has programmed my conditioning. Even my conditioning has been conditioned.